Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera bagi kita semuanya. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan dan salam sehat selalu untuk kita semua dimanapun kita berada. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, selamat pagi. A very good morning from Jakarta. Welcome back to the 5th Jakarta Geopolitical Forum 2021, Culture and Civilization, Humanity at the Crossroads. I'm Iriana Mardanus and I will be your host again for today's event as we will have our third and last plenary session. Not only that, ladies and gentlemen, today we're also going to have two stand-up comedians that will entertain us also. Get ready. We would like to inform for those who are joining virtually by Zoom platform that we provided an interpreter service, so you may choose to hear the event in English or Bahasa. Another information, ladies and gentlemen, is that all the participants and committee who are gathered here in Menara Kompas studio has been fully vaccinated and tested negative of COVID-19, and surely we will comply to COVID-19 protocols and procedures. Ladies and gentlemen, let me begin this morning by extending my warmest welcome to our distinguished guests and speakers for today. To the Governor of the National Resilience Institute of the Republic of Indonesia, the Honorable Lieutenant General Agus Wijoyo. Good morning, General. Selamat pagi, terima kasih sudah hadir kembali pagi ini. Thank you, General. Next to Vice Governor of the National Resilience Institute of the Republic of Indonesia, distinguished Air Marshal Wiko Sofian. Good morning, Marshal. Thank you for your participation today. Distinguished Committee of 5th Jakarta Geopolitical Forum 2021 and Lemhanas officials. Good morning to you all, ladies and gentlemen. Also, our distinguished speakers for today, and I was informed that all the speakers are joined virtually. So good morning, gentlemen. Last but not least, good morning to all the participants of the 5th Jakarta Geopolitical Forum 2021. I really hope everyone is in good health during this challenging time of COVID-19 pandemic. Ladies and gentlemen, as I informed before, that we will gonna have our third and last plenary session today. And without further ado, please give a big round of applause for our moderators today, Friska Clarissa and Rahmat Idris.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Yanda. Good morning, our honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Jakarta Geopolitical Forum 2021 with me, Friska Clarissa, and Rahmat Idris. Yes. Our honorable guests, participants, ladies and gentlemen, in this special occasion, now we are going to the third plenary session of the 5th Jakarta Geopolitical Forum 2021, and also which is the discussion session by our expert and distinguished speakers have joined us today.
Indeed, Friska, we are very delighted and also extremely honored to welcome 4 distinguished and esteemed speakers who will be joining us for the discussion today and sharing with us their insights and their knowledge on the geopolitical landscapes throughout Indonesia and the world. Our first speaker from the day is a patron and advisory board of the School of Government and Public Policy, who will be joining us virtually, Mr. Gita Wiryawan.
I would like to say good morning to our second speaker, Professor Donald K. Emerson, a senior fellow at the Freeman Spalding Institute for International Studies, who is also joining us virtually. Good morning.
And our third speaker for the day is an Indonesian historian known for his vast knowledge on the history, also joining us virtually, Mr. Baskara Tulus Wardaya, PhD.
Last but not least, our fourth speaker for today, Mr. Dimas Oki Nugroho, PhD, socio-political scholars, who will be joining us on virtually.
Virtually as well, all right. So before we start this webinar, allow me to remind all of our participants out there to please turn off your microphones. Our session will be conducted solely in English, so please type in your question in the chat box along with your name and your institution as well. And also please mention which speaker you would like to address your questions to.
Yes. Rahmat,
Yeah.
our honorable guests, participants, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to present our first speaker for today, Mr. Gita Wiryawan. The Zoom floor is yours, sir. Please, Mr. Gita, good morning.
Okay, good morning. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good morning to all of us. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Lemhanas and the Jakarta Geopolitical Forum, and most particularly Pa Agus Wijoyo and his team for allowing me to grace the event. I'd like to go through a few slides and hopefully have a further discussion on some of the illustrations that I'm going to show to you in the next few minutes. If we could just straight away go to page 4 of my presentation, if I could be helped with that. I want to start off with how the world has changed and how planet Earth has changed in the last 4.6 billion years. We all know that basically the first couple of billion years, planet Earth did not have oxygen. And we all know that simple life form started just about 3.6 to 3.8 billion years ago. And complexity within our forms didn't start out until about 600 to 700 million years ago. And that basically speaks of, how the planet has evolved and how we all have evolved. A lot of people don't know that lobsters have actually outlived humanity. Lobsters have been around for more than 300 million years ago. And we are the end product of an evolutionary process that's taken place for hundreds of millions of years in the past. If we take a look at page 5, we know that from a technological standpoint and a cultural standpoint and a humanity standpoint, we also have evolved. But I want to just point out the last 2,000 years, most particularly where ASEAN has basically been graced for around 400 years by Buddhism and 600 years by Hinduism. And ever since the 15th century, we've been graced by colonialism, Islam, Christianity, independence. And until today, we've gotten a good taste of how democracy has worked and perhaps how democracy needs to be reworked. And this is, I think, a sign of times. And if we were to map the last 2,000 years of the history of Indonesia and ASEAN, we can map that with, quite a notable Islamic civilization that basically spanned over 1,300 years ever since the culmination of the Umayyad Empire in the 7th century, and also the Abbasid Empire, which started off in the 8th century, which spanned over for the next few hundred years, and thereafter followed on by the Ottoman Empire, which basically pretty much lapsed until the early part of the 20th century. And this is sort of like a mapping of, how ASEAN has been situated in the world order in the last 2,000 years. And I'm of the view that the last 2,000 years worth of peace and stability would serve as capital for the next 2,000 years of peace and stability in the region. And if we move on to page 6, we can see that humanity and culture have been colored by decision-making or judgment, which would have been colored by not only biases in our minds, but also noises in our minds. And we know that, technology has been at the forefront of how ideas and ideology basically have been applied. And, we all know that historically, the people that would have attained positions of leadership would have been those that would have been able to use fiction as opposed to truths or facts to basically gather as many people as possible to cooperate. And the ability to basically think on a longitudinal basis as opposed to latitudinal basis has shown that those are the kinds of people that basically would have been able to gather people to rise up to the occasion and be able to show a position of leadership. However, we have also seen how the same or the very same technology has been employed by different ideas and ideologies to the extent that they have basically dovetailed into competition, if not unnecessary competition, which would have resulted in casualties in the context of humanity. In the next page, on page 7, we have seen how technology has evolved. And I think most particular in this illustration is how the speed of technological innovation has gone up, but also the acceleration of the speed has gone up. I call these the first and second derivatives of technological innovation. And I think it's important to note that at such time when the first derivative and the second derivative would go up, we are exposed or continuingly exposed to a larger margin of error, to the point where a larger margin of error exposes humanity to trials and errors that are much bigger or that have become much bigger. I think the manifestation of such error would have been, the First World War and the Second World War, which basically resulted in casualties of more than 100 million people. And I think it is not unreasonable to predict or hypothesize that going forward, by way of the continuing technological innovation at a greater speed and also at a greater acceleration, would only expose humanity to a much larger margin of error, to also a much larger trial and error, to a much larger error, which we all have to try to mitigate the risk of. It is upon us, the onus is upon humanity to make sure that those risks are continuously mitigated. In the next page, we also see how in the last 150 years, or most particularly ever since the first industrial revolution, how technology has been empowered for so many different objectives and purposes. But I think it is important to point out how Moore's law in the last few decades has been so accurate in predicting the exponentiality of growth in terms of the capacity of memory chips and also the speed with which memory chips can actually absorb and store data points. And this is, I think, going to basically reflect upon where humanity is headed going forward. Whereas in the 9th page, if we go to the next page, we see that the first and second derivatives are not likely to decline by way of what we have seen in the last few thousand years, most particularly just in the last 100 to 200 years. And this is, I think, a reckoning for humanity and something that we need to basically be conscious of, to the point where we cannot be technologically deterministic. And I think casualties in humanity have resulted by way of a particular leaderships taking a deterministic point of view with respect to technology. The Germans and the Americans and the Europeans in the World War II were employing the very same technology, but they had different ideas, they had different ideologies, they had different kinds of technological determinisms, to the point they actually resulted in something that would have been very, very unkind to humanity. And the next page, which is on page 10, is an illustration of climate change, how climate has changed for the worse. In the last 4.6 billion years, we have basically emitted about 1,400 gigatons of carbon. And most notably, half of that has been emitted just in the last 170 years, ever since the first industrial revolution in 1850. And this is, I think, a punctuation of how the world is going to be changing more rapidly going forward. But it also explains the finite nature of the carbon that's left on planet Earth. A lot of people don't know that we only have about 2,000 to 3,000 gigatons of carbon. A lot of people don't know that we have been emitting about 60 gigatons of carbon on a yearly basis, to the point where our finite nature of life expectancy is characterized by about 50 to 60 years left for humanity. Until and unless we change our habits, until and unless we decelerate the changing of climate, we are exposed to a very finite nature of our future. Whereas on page 11 is an illustration of what we believe can be done. And a lot of these, I think, are reflected in the Paris Accord, where we have determined to reduce our carbon emission by 50% in 2030, 25% in 2040, and the last 25% by 2050. And I think this takes a lot of things for us to do. But most particularly and most importantly, I think, is for the young generation, particularly Generation Z, to take political ownership with respect to things that are main course in nature. Main course being defined by stuff like climate change, being defined by financial inclusion, being defined by inequality, and to the point where the young generation members will take on political ownership with respect to issues such as climate change. I think there's better hope for us to basically embrace the planet a little bit more environmentally friendly. Now, this is also on top of the recognition that I think technology will be a better remedy as opposed to policy, at the rate that technology has been moving at a much more exponential rate as opposed to policy posturing, which has been moving at a much more linear rate. The gap or the divergence between the exponentiality of the private sector vis-a-vis the linearity of the policy posture sector, I think only means that it is upon us to make sure that ideas and ideology are moving in a more benign manner, so that the private sector will be more helpful in remedying our climate situation. In the next page, if we can go to page 13 or page 15, we have gone through a very much unprecedented episode in the last 20 months. On page 15, please. We have seen globally where more than 238 million people having been infected. In ASEAN alone, more than 12.4 million people having been infected. In Indonesia, more than 4.2 million people having been infected. This has been unprecedented. And we have gone through three types of shocks. The first type of shock is the shock of policy. The second type of shock is the shock of lifestyle. And the third type of shock is the shock of information. All these have basically led us to believe that the post-COVID era is only likely to be colored by a number of attributes. The most notable one of which is basically the deceleration of economic growth, but also the slowing down or decline of productivity and production by way of the collapse of the supply chain in China and a number of areas, as we have seen for the most parts of 2020. But also, we're seeing how people have learned to adjust by way of virtualizing themselves or digitizing themselves. But I'm also a big believer of the fact that technological innovations, which have been moving at a fast rate, have been able to collapse costs, where we are only likely to see a new super cycle of low inflation, if not a deflation. However, the way technology has been used by humanity has not been moving in a benign manner as we would have expected, to the point where conversations have gotten so polarized as opposed to bifurcated. And such polarization, I think, has entailed a much more bilateral, if not plurilateral type of thinking, as opposed to multilateral type of thinking. Last but not least on this page is, I think, the characterization of the tension that has been building up between China and the US, which has been coded as the decoupling. And I don't foresee the decoupling easing down in the next few years. And this, I think, is something that people in Southeast Asia would have to learn to live with, and also be able to help remedying going forward. In the next page, on page 16, is an illustration of some technological innovations that are reflected in what I call the mega trends. The first mega trend is basically the mega trend of money and the mega trend of energy a lot of capital is circulating within developed economies. There's about $100 trillion worth of liquidity, and energy is becoming easier to capture and store, most particularly the solar energy. In the last 5 years, technologically, people have been able to better absorb solar energy and also store energy to the point I think it's going to basically game change the energy equation of not only developed economies, but more particularly developing and underdeveloped economies around the world. The second mega trend is what I call the demonetization or the democratization of money. We have seen digital payment in China basically amounting to double the GDP of China at about $26 trillion, with the GDP of China at about $13 trillion. This is a reckoning, and this is something that I think is going to inspire people all over the world in terms of, changing their habits from the old paradigm of using cash to a non-cash type of paradigm. The third mega trend is what I call the anything, anytime, anywhere click. And this would have been propelled by somebody like Jeff Bezos in the early 90s, which basically game changed the way people transacted, where before they would have had to negotiate on a separate basis, transact on a separate basis, transport on a separate basis, whereas all those 3 or 4 or 5 components could have been done in just one click. And this has traveled geographically, but it also has traveled sectorally. It is not only in the marketplace sector, but it has also moved on to travel. It has moved on to healthcare. It has moved on to some extent in energy. It has moved on to tourism. I think the world is just going to be changing at a much more rapid pace. The fourth megatrend is artificial intelligence, where we're tinkering with technology as to re-electrify our neurons so that we could actually remedy ourselves from Alzheimer, dementia, stroke, or even improve upon our computational logic so that we could be smarter. The fifth is human longevity by way of how we can alter our genetic code so that we can be having a much higher IQ than just 100. Theoretically, IQ of humanity could actually go up to about 1,000 by way of the alteration of our genetic code. We could look better, we could be taller, but all these factors I think would graze upon ethical boundaries, scientific boundaries, religious boundaries, social, cultural, and even political boundaries. The last bit on this page is really the intersection between biological intelligence and also artificial intelligence. This is what a lot of people call singularity. I think this would entail a very different kind of humanity in the next 50 to 100 years, to the point where if we don't remedy the kind of inequality that we have seen in the last few decades, I think there's likely to be a new species called the useless species or the superfluous species, which will have to inevitably be part of the total humanity equation. And that, I think, will cause a bit of a different nuance for all of us to live together. In page 17, this is an illustration of some of the 5 game-changing innovations that we have seen in the last decade. The first is blockchain, in terms of how blockchain has been able to democratize, decentralize transactions within the finances, but I think it's only likely to reverberate to other types of transactions, be it political, be it social, be it cultural. And I think it is becoming very, very popular to the point where people believe in its ability to deliver transparency, identification, and also a recourse where until today, the centralistic type of exchanges have not yielded the kind of transparency and recourse that humanity would have desired. And this is, I think, something that we have to live with in the next few decades at the rate that we have seen blockchain growing at about 120% per year, as opposed to the internet for the period 1990 until 2020, growing at a rate of only 60%. The second innovation that has been game-changing is genome sequencing. And this is with respect to how we're going to be able to alter the genetic code. And within our gene, there is only 4 letters of C, A, G, T, each one of which could actually be altered to make ourselves or to augment ourselves to be better. But I think, as I discussed earlier, this is something that needs to involve many discourses so that we do not cross the boundaries of ethics, religious, beliefs, spirituality, culture, and social justice. The third is artificial intelligence, which I've illustrated earlier. Fourth is robotics. I think the manifestation of robotics in the last few years would have been in cars like Tesla, which has been able to basically amalgamate autonomy, artificial intelligence, and robotics. And this is all reflected in the valuation of the company, which has skyrocketed, beyond traditional conventional automotive companies. Last but not least is energy storage. And this is manifested in how solar energy has been able to become a lot more efficient, become a lot more effective, not only in terms of absorbing energy, but also in terms of storing. And I think in the years ahead, we're going to be able to see game-changing, behaviors and how we're going to be able to actually transmit and distribute energy. In the next page, this is an illustration of, I've alluded to this earlier in terms of how payment in China has amounted to more than the GDP, twice the GDP of China, whereas in Indonesia, digital payment value has only amounted to less than 10% of our GDP. So it speaks of the kind of upside potential for countries like Indonesia, to go forward into, and I think it's going to be massive. And I think it's going to be changing the habits, the culture, the behaviors of many people, not only in Indonesia, but also in the region. In the next page, this is an application of blockchain. I think within the next 2 to 3 years, blockchain transactions will surpass the transaction value of credit cards, which would have been conventional in terms of value propositions and paradigms, at the rate that Bitcoin and crypto and the application of blockchain would have been growing at a rate of 120% per year. And in the next page, this is an illustration of how Tesla is actually being appreciated by the investing community. If we take a look at the valuation of Tesla on a per car produced basis, Tesla trades at about $1.5 million on a per car produced basis, whereas Volkswagen, General Motors, Ford, Chrysler, Toyota, and all the rest of the conventional automotive companies, they're only trading at about $20,000 to $30,000 on a per car produced basis. This is not a manifestation of whether this company is more or less valuable, but this is much more a manifestation of how companies like Tesla have been able to move into the 21st, if not 22nd centuries by way of amalgamating artificial intelligence, autonomy, and also robotics in a much more sophisticated manner than many of the other conventional companies. What it also means is that many of the conventional companies are likely to go bankrupt at the rate that the demand for cars in the next 5 to 10 years will dwindle by way of autonomous driving, because the demand for drivers, the demand for driven cars will decline in a big way at the rate that we only use cars at a rate of 5 to 10% within the 24 hours that are allocated for us. The next page, on page 21, is an illustration of some of the sectors that are likely to be disrupted. These include energy, which amounts to about $60 billion at about 5% of our GDP. Real estate, more than 17 million heads of households do not have homes yet. Healthcare, financial services. This is something that needs to be upgraded in a big way. It only amounts to about 40% of our GDP. That's only about $450 billion. Most modern economies have a financial services to GDP ratio of above 100%. The next one is education, which is really, really big and necessary for Indonesia to move ahead and move up the value chain. Agriculture, which is the biggest sector, amounting to about 13 to 14% of our GDP. That's about $140 billion per year. And last but not least is tourism. Our international tourism only contributes to about 1 to 1.5% of our GDP, as compared to Thailand, where the international tourism contributes to about 16 to 20% of the GDP. On page 22 is an illustration of how Indonesia has progressed in the last few decades. I think it is notable that we need to basically be more sensitive to how inequality has been widening in the last many years. And this is something that has been coloring not only countries like Indonesia, but even modern economies such as Germany, the United States, and also China as of late. We need to make sure that our tax ratio continues to go up. We need to make sure that our GDP per capita continues to grow up so that we can break through the middle income trap. But I think most importantly, in terms of lowering or reducing inequality in Indonesia so that the redistribution of wealth, can be more properly done. It is important to note, COVID in the last 20 months, I think has, resulted in a lower ability to redistribute welfare by way of the deceleration of economic growth. And it's not only unique in Indonesia, but it also applies to many economies around the world. In page 23 is an illustration of where we stack up in terms of marginal productivity on a PPP adjusted basis. We're only at, merely $24,000. If we look at column number 2, we're only merely at $24,000 of marginal productivity on a PPP adjusted basis, as compared to Singapore at about 164,000. This reflects upon our degree of competitiveness, if not lack of competitiveness, to the point we want to multilateralize in the next few years. I think we have to ramp up our productivity so that we can actually have a competitive position when we sit down with many people from around the world. And also the money supply. If we take a look at the last column, our money supply to GDP ratio is only at 44%. And this speaks of how quickly, if not how slowly, we're going to be able to recover the demand side of the economy, much less the supply side of the economy, as compared to countries like Singapore, where the money supply to GDP ratio is at 150%. And many modern economies around the world, inclusive of the US, China, Japan, South Korea, and the European Union, they have a money supply to GDP ratio of much higher than 100%. So this is something that I think we need to take a view of going forward in order for all of us to basically, move up the value chain and be competitive. On page 25 is an illustration of our ability or lack of ability to attract capital. Capital is important. We can have great ideas, but if we don't have money, those ideas are not likely to be executable. Our ability to attract FDI on a per capita per year basis is at around $100, similar to that of the Philippines, similar to that of Thailand. But if we take a look at Vietnam, Vietnam has been rising up to the occasion. They're at about $293 on a per capita per year basis. And Singapore is what I've been calling the LeBron James of FDI. They've been able to attract more than $15,000 of FDI on a per capita per year basis. This is, I think, a manifestation of where we actually need to be improving ourselves upon. On page 26, where do we move from here in terms of our democratization? We have been used to equating freedom of speech with basically algorithmic amplification. And I think a lot of this, falls on the responsibility of the digital platform technologies, which I don't think have done a huge favor to how many countries around the world have been democratizing, including that in the US, including that in many European countries, and including ourselves. And I think we have to rethink the philosophy of equating amplification of narratives that are filled with anger, hatred, by way of algorithmic amplification as a definition of democracy. The philosophy so far has been that, those kinds of narratives are naturally going to be neutralized with and by information narratives that are of good nature. Unfortunately, the algorithm has been amplifying more of the not so good narratives. I think this deserves a rethink in a big way if we want to survive as a thriving and robust democracy. Monopolies of ideas are not great. In the old days, I went to school where I was taught that perfect competition was the greatest thing on earth. Whereas now the young generation, they're all too used to the idea that if you want to be successful in business, you've got to
Mr.
be
Gita, our time is very limited, sir. If you can please wrap up the presentation.
Let me just wrap up in 1 minute. I think there is a need for social re-engineering. We need to make sure that if we allow ourselves to be surveilled by the government, I think we need to be able to surveil the government in order for democracy to be continuously robust. Last but not least, I think we need to turn up the volume on page 27. We need to turn up the volume on building and expanding our range. We need to turn up the volume on creating fiction that are good, fictions that are good, so that we can get as many people as possible to gather so that they can cooperate on great ideas and great ideologies. Longitude over latitude, facts over opinions, minds over technology, technology over policy, and we have to have digital hygiene. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
All right, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. A big round of applause, please, for the visionary Mr. Gita Wiryawan, who has delivered and presented us with such eye-opening facts of humankind, civilizations, and also future projections, Friska. Yep. And thank you very much indeed, sir. And to all of our participants out there, I'm sure that you have a lot of questions and observations on the topic. Please do, if you have the questions, type them in the comments box, or in the chat box, rather, in the Zoom application.
And I'd like to remind you to type in your questions in the chat box, where our team will curate your questions and we'll deliver them at the end of our last speaker's presentation. And please type in your name and your institution as well, and also please mention to whose speaker you would like to direct your questions to.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, our live and virtual audience, we are now moving on to the next presentations for the current sessions. Next, we have Professor Donald K. Emerson, Senior Fellow at the Freeman Spaulding Institute for International Studies. Professor Donald K. Emerson, the Zoom floor is yours, sir, please.
Can you hear me now? Okay. All right, here we go. Thank you very much for the invitation to join you. And frankly, after listening to Gita, I'm tempted just to thank him for his presentation, and we'll move on to the next person. It's been an exhaustive iteration of all kinds of aspects. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating, Gita. I learned a lot from what you just said. I really did. It also is helpful because, in a way, it leads into the few remarks that I would like to make, if I could. Your perspective, it seems to me, although it's very broad, you covered all kinds of sectors, technological, economic, political, and so forth, nevertheless, does seem to me to represent the orientation, more or less, of an engineer. Social re-engineering is your phrase, very, very important. Yes, indeed. And the implication of what you were saying is that, particularly in dealing with the problems involved in climate change, that geoengineering is perhaps an important way to go. And obviously there's a big debate about that, and some people wonder if it's a good idea or not. We could get into that. You even went so far as to say that you believe in technology over policy. Well, Gita, you know me pretty well. Okay, that sounds good if technology is going to outperform policy. But when we get into the comparison between policy and technology, then we get this very difficult topic, this very messy topic, which is hard to render scientifically, called the state. What happens to the state? And so in a way to complement, both with an I, complement with an I, and also with an E, that is to mesh with your presentation, I'd like to talk a little bit about the implications for the state. Now, I was going to start with the history that you actually covered. You went back millions of years. So thank you for doing that. I can skip that part of my presentation entirely and go directly to the present. And my overarching topic here, which is also very messy, as is the topic of the state, is globalization. It seems to me the conference here has two themes, civilization and globalization. And I'm going to talk about globalization. At least that's my framework, rather than civilization. Although during the discussion, if there's time, it would be fascinating to get into that particular topic, in particular, the civilizations that are, as it were, on offer around the world. But I'm going to skip that and go straight to what I might venture to say, and perhaps this sounds excessively pessimistic, But again, that's not so bad because Dita, you had a lot of optimism, and so let me say a little bit about the other side of the coin, the darker side of the coin, if I could. And I want to argue that the current phase of globalization, we can number it, 1, 2, 3, 4. That doesn't really matter. There's a debate about that. I'll skip it completely. The current phase of globalization, it seems to me, is obviously geared, among other things, to the spread of emergencies, right? Now, plagues, of course, date all the way back to the 6th century. Nothing new. We've had 2 world wars in the 20th century. Wow, talk about emergencies. But I must say that in the present circumstances, and I'm really going to talk very much about current conditions and project them a little bit into the future, it seems to me that these globalized emergencies, it's a kind of globalization of emergency, if I can use that phrase, might be looked at in several ways that are relevant to the position and role of the state. As I think you and I have discussed perhaps in the past, I tend to like to make the following distinction between 2 kinds of problems. Let's just speak abstractly here. Cockpit problems versus mandate problems. And when I say mandate problems, I don't mean the mandate that requires you to wear a mask or to, hunker down in your house because of COVID-19. That is obligatory, that you have to do. It's coercive, right? No, I mean mandate from the bottom up, not the top down. The mandate that one acquires in the course of an election when people vote into office someone and thereby, give that person, in a sense, a mandate. That's the term that I'm using. Now, let's start with cockpit problems. Okay, you're a pilot, you're in the cockpit, you look out the windshield, and there's a plane coming directly at you. It's a passenger flight. You're not going to get on the public address system and say to the passengers, the stewards will be coming down in the aisles with pieces of paper on which you can write your votes so that we can vote and have a democratic election here, a democratic referendum as to whether I should turn right or left. By then, everybody's dead. A cockpit problem is characterized by extreme urgency and lack of time. A mandate problem is very different. Let's imagine you're living in a village next to a river and there's a corporation that wants to build a factory right by the village, and you're worried that it may pollute the river and otherwise worsen your quality of life. Now, in that case, it's not a particular rush. The company can wait. The government is probably involved as well. There may be certain rules that have to be observed. And so why can't the villagers simply get together? Maybe there's a meeting, maybe the elders around the table. And it amounts to the equivalent of trying to get a mandate from them as to whether or not, number one, the building can occur, the operation can occur, and second, if it does occur, are there certain conditions to protect the quality of life of the individual still living in the village, right? Now, you can see where I'm headed. The cockpit problem lends itself to rapid action by an elite. The pilot, except for the co-pilot, is probably the only person on the plane that actually knows how to fly it, right? So a concentration of expertise at the top, forget democracy. Just not desirable in those circumstances. Now, the mandate, on the other hand, lends itself to the standard notion of democracy, of having a discussion, disagreement, maybe the majority decides, and you solve the problem that way. And so I would say that if we look at the situation now and we project into the rest of the 21st century, I would argue that other things being equal, the proportion of problems facing the world that are cockpit problems compared to mandate problems may go up. Now, I'm not going to predict the exact balance, but the sheer interdependence of the world, the effect of globalization to make what happens, in some country on one side of the world have a ramifying effect on societies on the other side of the world, I mean, I'm exaggerating to some extent, means that when things go wrong, they could go wrong on a major scale, right? And therefore trigger the cockpit reaction rather than the mandate reaction. Now, we'll see what happens at COP26. This is going to be very interesting, 10 days from now, right? COP26, I'm not sure about my screen here. Is that okay? Okay. COP26 is an example, I suppose you could say, of democracy. Insofar, there are people representing sovereign countries all over the world. They get together. in Glasgow. They're sitting around a table, and I'm not sure that they're going to necessarily take all that many votes, but there will be resolutions, I assume, coming out of the event, right? Is that appropriate to an emergency with regard to what global warming is actually already doing to the planet? The answer, I guess, has to be yes. I think many people still think that democracy is a good thing, and there is no single dictator who's going to decide this matter for the entire planet. Obviously, that's completely out of the question. But the issue is, will COP26 simply reinforce the sheer voluntary character, right, of these commitments that the individual countries are making to fight climate change? Will there be any accountability? Will there be any sort of, if you don't do this, then what? And frankly, I think that's very important, because that's the characteristic of a cockpit, right? You have action. You don't just have discussion. So that's a question I think that remains to be seen. There's another aspect here I want to emphasize, which is the domestication of international relations. I gave a lecture in a class in a course on international relations not long ago. And I began the lecture by saying, by the way, your class is going to be going out of existence. The course will disappear at the end of the semester. And of course, I was joking, but the professor, who knows me pretty well, sort of half smiled, but he was a little worried as well. And I explained that, after all, there is no such thing as international relations. There are only intermestic relations. That is, intermestic in the sense that domestic relations overlap and interact with so-called international relations. So the notion that these are countries that are distinct entities, right, that are reaching across the ocean or across the border to have purely diplomatic or perhaps other more activist dealings with a neighboring country or some other country. No, that's naive. You know, the image of the billiard balls on the table, which has underlined much of the literature in realist international relations thinking, it seems to me, is completely obsolete and has been rendered obsolete precisely by the technology that, Gita, you spent so much time and very usefully and constructively spent time elaborating for us. I mean, I won't go into the details of any example, but just consider the destructive impact on relations between the US and other countries exercised by Donald Trump. You know, this incompetent, egomaniacal, narcissistic authoritarian whose domestic ambitions had distinct international repercussions, and vice versa. And now, if I'm sitting in Jakarta as a member of the Indonesian government, and I'm looking across the Pacific Ocean, and I'm thinking to myself, can I rely on the United States? You know, what if Biden loses the midterm election and then loses the national presidential election in 2024 and is replaced, God forbid, by the idiot who preceded him? You know, can I really count on that? What's my time horizon in dealing with the United States? These are serious problems. The implications for all of this for democracy versus authoritarian rule, which is a critical characteristic of the state, I want to deal with as well. According to Freedom House, and this, of course, is an American outfit based in New York, and one can question the methodology. I don't have time to get into that, but I mean, it's a credible and plausible outfit. Freedom House has said that 2020 was the 15th consecutive year of decline in global freedom. The countries experiencing deterioration outnumbered those with improvements by the largest margin recorded since the negative trend began in 2006. Freedom House has concluded that the long democratic recession is deepening. In 2020, according to another set of analysts, the Economist Intelligence Unit, its democracy index worsened in every single region of the world in 2020, as the COVID emergency, of course, became global. This latest democratic recession resulted largely, mainly from top-down cockpit measures, such as lockdowns and barriers to travel, undertaken to defeat the pandemic. Nearly 75% of the world's population in 2020, last year, lived in a country that faced democratic decline. The Economist went so far as to write that in 2020, across the world, citizens experienced the biggest rollbacks of individual freedoms ever undertaken by governments during peacetime. Wow, that's quite a statement. That said, compliance with these restrictions was largely voluntary. So the question then becomes, as the pandemic abates, to the extent that it does abate, will governments relinquish the control that they established during the emergency? Will they get out of the cockpit? Obviously not so far out that they can't drive the plane anymore, don't misunderstand. At this point, it seems likely that the pandemic will not disappear, but rather will become endemic with a reduced death toll, but a longer future alongside seasonal illnesses such as the flu, which happens pretty much every year and does take a toll, admittedly. But there are medicines one can take, vaccinations, and so forth. Of course, the prospect of reversing democratic decline, now that will depend on many other variables as well. So I guess what I'm saying is that this tilt toward cockpit responses, fueled by both global warming and also COVID-19, could be considered part of a trend that I would characterize, and forgive me, I'm an academic, so academics love to invent words, and I'm no exception. I'm afraid. One could characterize this current state of globalization by emergency, if you will, as a phenomenon that one could call statification, by which I simply mean the enlargement of state action and authority worldwide, other things, of course, being equal. Now, that may further undermine democracy. Inequalities of income that Gita referred to, and wealth, could add to this a trend toward stratification between the elite and the mass, class stratification, which could lead to a shift in the balance of power within countries even further away from democratic values and institutions. Now, maybe I'm sounding too pessimistic, but at least I think it's helpful to pose this possibility. And then if we have reason to retreat from it toward a more optimistic position, then so much the better. There are many different models of democracy. Certainly, however, it seems to me, two stand out, and they're very broad models within which there is variation. A process model and a performance model. Free and fair elections, including personal rights to speak and vote, that's all about process. But if, as China argues from its own experience, a results-oriented autocracy is better than a democracy at achieving economic growth, then, hey, democracy loses the competition and dictatorship wins. All right, in Indonesia, let me now come down to Indonesia. When Indonesians were recently asked whether or not they believe that democracy is already, as always, preferable to any other form of government, a huge majority, roughly 3/4 of the respondents said yes. But an article by Saiful Mujani and Bill Little in the current issue of the Journal of Democracy is subtitled, Jokowi Sidelines Democracy. Civil liberties are a particular concern. In 2009, only 17% of Saiful's respondents believed that people were afraid to talk about politics. That is, people in Indonesia, Indonesians were afraid to talk about politics. Only 17%. In a survey this year, the figure had doubled to 39%. Now, I'm not going to try to explain that. I'm just giving you the figures. It is a cause for some concern. Now, if I can move back to the United States, President Biden is planning a summit for democracy on the 9th and 10th of December. When I think about that, I think about the Bali Democracy Forum. Indonesia is, after all, the third largest democracy in the world. But there's a very different approach being taken in Indonesia, the way it presents its democratic image abroad, from the approach that's being taken in the United States. Let's face it, for Jokowi, economic growth is the #1 priority. Remember, he was in Solo, right? The question was, how do you get this furniture shipped from point X to point Y in a gigantic archipelago? Now, I'm being very simplified here, but it seems to me that does help to contribute to an explanation of his commitment to infrastructure, his commitment to economic growth. Now, the Bali Democracy Forum includes countries that are not democracies. Now, this would violate the approach in the United States, where you belong in the forum, as it were, only if you can prove you're a democracy. I know in December 2018, I happened to attend the Bali Democracy Forum, and Hungary was present. Now, Viktor Orban is not a Democrat. And I confess, being an academic and feeling somewhat unrestrained, I did gently and politely criticize Hungary during my presentation at the event. And their delegation was very upset, and they came up to me afterwards and he said I was being unfair and so forth. They were pretty upset. Now, I think Indonesia's argument, or specifically the argument of the Kementerian Luar Negeri, Kemlu, is you got to get everybody involved, right? Maybe Hungary will reconsider. I mean, it's the first country in the world that has declared itself an illiberal democracy, and maybe that's what's happening. Democracy will continue. It's just that the liberal element, the right to speak out and so forth, will be compromised. So there are lots of changes that are possible in the future. Don't misunderstand. I'm not saying, number one, that the state is going to dominate everything, or number two, that democracy is dead, or at least dying. I think anything can happen in the future, and I'm very reluctant to make predictions long range. But I do want to argue, and I'll end on this point. Well, no, I won't. I want to say one other thing, which is I was going to talk about technology, but since technology was the major topic of what Gita had to say, I will only add to what he said this. Gita talked about, people becoming useless, the useless species. Humanity is a useless species. Of course, I think one of the things he had in mind was the impact of automation on the labor market, right? People that they don't have jobs anymore. So what do you do with them? Well, I guess my answer in the theme of stratification is that the state figures out what to do with them. And there are all kinds of possibilities that I don't have time to get into, including positive possibilities. I don't want to end up being described as a complete pessimist, but I do think these are problems that we need to deal with. And thank you for listening.
Professor Donald K. Emerson. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, the insightful Professor Donald K. Emerson. Please give applause. Thank you so much for the insight about how the implications of technology as double-edged sword, especially in this globalization era,
Indeed.
and how the implication to our democracy and also to our geopolitical in Indonesia. And to our participants, we are sure you have many questions and observations regarding this topic, so please leave your comments in our chat box.
All right, once again, we'd like to remind all of you out there, participants, to please type in your questions, your comments, your observations in the chat box of Zoom applications, and our team will curate your questions. And please also type in your name and your institutions and mention to us which speaker whom you'd like to direct your questions to. All right, continuing on with the 5th Jakarta Geopolitical Forum today, it is my honor and delight to present to you our third speaker of the day, is the Indonesian historian Baskara Tulus Wardaya, PhD. Mr. Baskara, the Zoom floor is yours.
Mr. Baskara, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Mas Rahmat and Mbak Friska. Yang saya hormati Gubernur Lemhanas, Bapak Letnan Jenderal Agus Wijoyo, Bapak Wakil Gubernur Lemhanas, para pejabat tinggi negara dan TNI, Pak Gita, Pak Donald Emerson, rekan-rekan dari Kompas TV, para peserta Jakarta Geopolitical Forum yang kelima, yang semuanya saya muliakan dan saya hormati. Selamat pagi, selamat petang, salam hormat dan salam sehat untuk Anda semua. Merupakan kehormatan besar bagi saya untuk ikut berpartisipasi di dalam forum yang sangat penting ini, dan izinkan saya untuk menyampaikan presentasi saya di dalam bahasa Inggris sebagaimana yang diinstruksikan oleh panitia. Could you please show me my presentation? Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, the title of my presentation to you today is Technology as a Double-Edged Sword. I would like to divide my presentation into several smaller parts. I will give you a little introduction, and then we will have the discussion, some closing notes, and 3 recommendations. Let's now start with the introduction. Introduction number 1, next, is about the main points that I would like to present to all of you this morning or this evening. These are the points that I want to offer to you. Modern technology started in the past, but today it continues to advance. It's moving very rapidly, as my predecessors were all presenting to us. And along the way, technology has helped us humans tremendously. But at the same time, technology is like a double sword. It has two sides, one good side and one not so good side, as we all know. Because of that, I think we should be wise in using it. We should be wise. We should be careful. We should be thoughtful in using it. Because otherwise, we might perish together, along with all the cultures and civilizations that we have produced. Next. Introduction number 2, let's remember briefly about the Earth as our common home. Next. Ladies and gentlemen, this is our home. This is planet Earth, the blue, beautiful, and big planet where we are all living today. Next. And these are our neighbors. These are all the 8 or maybe 9, if you want to include little Pluto there, the dwarf planet. Our neighbors, the other planets in the same solar system. And you can see there with the red arrows where we are located, where our home is located, and where our neighbors are located around us. Next. And this is, if you want, planet Earth in comparison to other planets in terms of size. The yellow one is the big sun, where the biggest center of this solar system, and then one of those little things is the Earth where we live. While Jupiter is bigger and Saturn is also bigger, but the sun is the biggest one, and the Earth is not quite big in this comparison. Next. And that is the view, as most of you probably have seen it. That's the view out of our home if it's viewed from the surface of planet Mars. That little white dot there, that's where we are at the moment. Okay, next. And as the third part of my introduction, let's now look at the short history of technology. I'm a historian by training, so I would like to, usually I tend to present things from a bit historical perspective. Next. It all started in the city of Florence, as we all know, around 1300s. The city was very prosperous. In the middle of the city, there was the river Arno, and a lot of people from the northern part, or southern part, eastern part, western part of the Italian peninsula came to do business, to do commerce there. And around 1350s, there was this family called the Medici family. And the Medici family was very important in Florence, not only because this is a very good banking or bankers, family of bankers, but also one thing about the Medici family, it was not a noble family at all, maybe originally from a farmer family, but then rose this man by the name of Cosimo de' Medici. He and other members of the Medici family put aside the funds that they have to encourage people to better their education. And among them was to study texts, classical texts from the old Greece and Rome. Next. And that was the beginning of a movement, as we all know, which was called Renaissance. Renaissance, in a way, was quote unquote, rebirth of ideas from the classical Greece and Rome. And it included many aspects, including arts, law, government, education, daily practices, life in the society, and many other things. But one of the important things about what happened during the Renaissance was that there was a paradigm shift. A paradigm shift took place from theocentric view of the world to anthropocentric view of the world. So it marked the beginning of a new trend of that time called humanism. Humanism, in turn, helped the development of science and technology, our topic this day, the last 2 days. And science and technology certainly ushered the beginning of the so-called Industrial Revolution. Next. In the Industrial Revolution, as we also know, there was a change in the modes of production. The manual mode of production was being replaced by the mechanical mode of production. In other words, people began to use machines to produce what they needed at that time. There are two sides of the Industrial Revolution. Side number one was it made people easier to produce necessary goods they needed, be it food, clothing, shelters, or other needs. Next. Along with that, there was the negative side of Industrial Revolution. Why? Because it enhanced the harshness, if not brutality, of capitalism, of colonialism, and of imperialism. And the harshness or the brutality was suffered by people both in Europe itself, but also and especially among the colonized people. I think it was including us, our ancestors, our predecessors here in Indonesia, because we were also colonized people for quite a long time. Next. All along, technology continues to advance. But again, like a double-edged sword, technology has two sides, just like the Industrial Revolution, the positive side and also the negative side. On the positive side, ladies and gentlemen, technology helps produce many products that are needed by humanity. On the other side, the negative side, it also results in many negative impacts that could harm human life. Because of that, I think the two sides of technology need to be, I don't know, at least to be rediscussed, reobserved, reevaluated, and reconsidered. And I think this is exactly what we have been doing yesterday and today. Next. Now we come to the discussion part of my little presentation. Next. Again, Renaissance started in the city of Florence in Italy, but it spread to other parts of Europe and later would become a global trend. But in any case, Renaissance helped the birth of the so-called scientific revolution. During this scientific revolution, a series of events marked the emergence of modern science, including the developments in mathematics, in physics, astronomy, biology, chemistry, and several other fields. This development, in turn, transformed people's views of society and nature, as we would see, for instance, during the Enlightenment or Aufklärung. But in any case, during the scientific revolution, there are many prominent thinkers who came about, who presented new ideas. Among them were certainly Sir Francis Bacon and, of course, Galileo Galilei, whose picture you can see in this panel. Next. In more practical level, the scientific revolution was quote-unquote translated into many technological inventions. It all began in Europe, particularly, or debatably, maybe it's a bit debatable, but let's say, according to this understanding or version, at least the technological inventions began in Europe. But then it soon spread to other parts of the world, and later it would touch almost every human need globally. As a result, from food production to communication, from the transportation system to daily financial transaction, all are influenced by technology. Next. However, ladies and gentlemen, not everything was fine with technology, unfortunately. As also mentioned by the previous speakers, at the beginning of the 20th century, for instance, advanced technology had shown its ugly face in the form of course, World War I, which was mentioned by Dr. Gita Wirjawan earlier. And it caused much suffering and the loss of millions of lives. Then it was also due to the further advance of technology that roughly 20 years after World War I, in 1939, another global war took place in the form of World War II. It also caused much suffering and the loss of even many more millions of lives, just like the life that you and I are having today, the same life. More specifically, the advances in technology, along with human ambition, human greed, human cruelty, resulted in the Holocaust with all its horrors, as we all know. Next. Then during the Cold War period, well, it was true. There was no direct military conflict between the two chief opposing sides, which were the United States and its allies on one side, and the Soviet Union and its allies on the other side. No direct military conflict between these two nations. However, the potential for a global and total destruction was real at the time, as it was reflected or expressed in the military theory called MAD, mutually assured destruction. The technological advance and the production of the nuclear war made such a global and total destruction obviously possible. We were almost there. Say, for instance, with the Cuban Missile Crisis and other history of conflicts. In case of a nuclear war, as we can predict, the victim would not just be limited to the nations involved in the conflict, but the victim would also include almost any living thing or living being on this planet. We all know that. Next. Then there is something, a few things that are happening, which I don't know, it might be a light at the end of the tunnel. We don't know yet. But just like what Dr. Rio Hassan and Dr. Robertus Robert shared with us yesterday, since the beginning of the 21st century, in part also thanks to technology, I think, humanity enters a period that seems to be better, quote unquote, from the previous period. As mentioned yesterday, beginning in the early days of this century, the 21st century, technology has made it possible for us humans to reduce hunger, to reduce plagues, and also to reduce the possibility of the recurrence of open wars. Next. These are just further explanation about those three aspects, so we can skip it. Next. Yes, next panel, please. Okay, in short, ladies and gentlemen, technology has helped us, human beings, to live relatively more secure and enjoyable life. It has helped produce many benefits to humans, from the most advanced scientific programs, such as the space programs, but also to the most mundane needs of daily life, like drinking a cup of tea in the morning or later during our break. These are all supported by technology. Next. However, at the same time, there is another side of technology which I have mentioned to you earlier that could harm human life. This is the case, for instance, and especially when greed and pride entice certain people to use technological advances not to produce goods for humanity, or goods that would be beneficial to us, other humans, but to maximize their own gains and benefits. This situation made humanity stand at the crossroad of civilization, and also makes humanity to ponder which way to go. And because of that, there is the need to identify, to evaluate, and to reconsider the many dimensions of technology, to look at it from different angles. Next. And for that, let us now briefly go back to history. As I mentioned to you, in the 1300s or 14th century, there was this movement called Renaissance. And during the Renaissance, there was a paradigm shift from being theocentric to being anthropocentric, way in which people view the world around them. A view that everything should be centered on humans. It was in part thanks to this anthropocentric view of the world that modern science and later technology were born. Humanism then became a new quote-unquote religion, especially in Europe, but also perhaps also in other parts influenced by Europe, in which people think that everything is measured against human needs. What is good for humans must be good in itself. What is useful for humans must be something that we all need to achieve. So the measurement is the needs of humans. What is good for humans is absolute good in itself. Moreover, ladies and gentlemen, humanism celebrates freedom and individuality. And individuality is put on the pedestal in a high place. So while in theocentrism, humans glorify God, in humanism, humans glorify humans themselves. Next. So that was just a paradigm shift, but as in any paradigm shift, many things are influenced by this paradigm. There are also some consequences because of that anthropocentric view. Because of that, now humans can easily marginalize other species who also live on Earth. And sometimes humans also marginalize the planet itself, planet Earth, our common home. Humans also often use technology to exploit natural resources without considering that such acts could endanger the common home, the blue planet, and even endanger humanity itself. Certain strong human individuals implement their own rule in dealing with other humans. And the main purpose is, or the chief purpose at least, is to benefit themselves. And the strong human individuals would win because they master technology, while the weak, meaning those who don't master technology, would become losers. And sometimes, here is a little note on my presentation here. These losers, sometimes they have to be happy only because they can receive the so-called CSR, corporate social responsibilities. Okay, next. This is an example, something that we have talked about a lot in the last 2 days. The internet, which initially was used just for helping people in long-distance communication, it now plays almost central role in many human activities, in education, in transportation, entertainment, even in religious practices. All are using the internet. As a result, and sometimes for practical purposes, many people would happily surrender their personal data to anonymous applications or internet providers. And consequently, a growing number of personal data are being acquired by those who have control over communication technology. And in further step, these people would collect and use the data, or the big data, if you will, to serve their own networks of global interests. So it is sad to say that technology, which has helped the celebration of freedom and the glorification of human individuality since the time of the Renaissance, today becomes a threat to freedom and to individuality itself. Next. These are some further small examples or short examples. Something that also Mr. Rudy Brighton was talking about yesterday. The artificial intelligence, AI, especially in algorithm, it is increasingly capable of recording and predicting human choices and behavior. Your choices and your behavior, my choices and my behaviors. AI is increasingly capable to do that in terms of your economic, even political choices, maybe also personal inclination and things like that are more growingly predictable by AI. And then nanotechnology and health sciences, increasingly capable of identifying and sometimes could be stealing one's most personal biological data. What is going on within our bodies could be stolen by people who are capable of using nanotechnology. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, the nuclear weapons, it's also growing rapidly, and increasingly, nuclear weapons are capable of destroying humanity and even planet Earth, maybe within minutes, if not seconds. Next. So consequently, ladies and gentlemen, left alone, I think technology is capable of not only destroying humanity, but it's also capable of gradually demolishing every single individual person as a unique human being with his or her fundamental values and dignity. Remember yesterday, Dr. Robertus Robert mentioned about Frankenstein. Okay, next. So again, in the spirit of humanism, people who control the communication or social media technology can think that what is good for them must be good in itself. For them, other human beings are worthy only as long as they are useful for their global networks of interests. In that case, technology has potentials to threat, to seize, and also to tear apart humanity, mencapik-capik kemanusiaan kita. Moreover, there is a possibility that because of technological advance, humanity is waiting for its own collective collapse. Okay, next. So as a closing notes, I would like to offer to you three thoughts, which you might like or not, but this is what I would like to offer to you. Number one, I think we need to stop the potentials of technology to destroy human life and the life of fellow occupants of this beautiful planet Earth. Number two, we need to stop the possibility of technology to exploit human individuality for personal gains or benefits. And number three, I think practical steps need to be taken and taken immediately. Next. So for the next three panels, I would like to suggest three recommendations. Next, recommendation number one is that on the local level, I think we need to learn from any forms of local wisdom and tradition, particularly on how to treat the environment, the earth with care and also with respect. How to care and how to respect this Mother Earth. More specifically, I think we need to learn from the knowledge and also from the experiences of traditional communities, masyarakat adat, on how to navigate between traditional practices and modern technologies. Recommendation number two, I think in the field of education, we should provide young people, students, with educational materials that remind them the importance of universal human values. Values that transcend primordial boundaries, values that will encourage them to consider the common issues, the common problem of humanity. And those materials, I think, should promote the awareness of the impact of technology, such as the impact of technology on global warming or climate change, as has been promoted by this young girl, Greta Thunberg, who criticized many leaders only talk blah, blah, blah without any real action. And also the materials should include the impact of technology on the loss of a person's individuality and dignity as human beings. But also, generally speaking, I think the materials should also teach the students about the threat of the threat of technology to the survival of us Homo sapiens as one of the species that live on planet Earth. Next. And my last but not least recommendation is that on the national level, I think state institutions such as Lemhanas, the Indonesian National Resilience Institute, should open more doors for collaboration. And that is collaboration on the local, national, regional, and international levels in order to address issues pertaining to the common interests of humanity. The issues of the so-called national resilience, I think, should not be limited to issues on how to defend a nation from possible external or domestic military attack. National resilience should also include issues on how to collaborate with other nations as fellow members of the same global human community in the face of possible collective failure due to the unstoppable advances in technology. Next. So those are big things. So in the meantime, let us continue to join hands and work together to protect that little floating planet that is in there. Next. Thank you very much. Terima kasih. Matur nuwun. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Baskara. It is therefore two sides of technology that have to be observed, re-evaluated, and also reconsidered. The measurement is not only about human, but also humanity and our Earth, the universal of human values. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, Mr. Baskara Tulus Wardaya with a remarkable presentation. To our participants, I'm sure you have many questions and observations about this topic, so please leave your comments in our chat box.
All right, I learned so much about the world in the last an hour, Priska. And once again, we would like to remind you, our virtual participants, to please type in your questions in the chat box. Our team will again curate your questions and we will deliver speaker's presentation. And please type in your name and your institution as well. And also please mention the question or the speaker rather who would like to direct your question to.
And the participants, we are excited to present our fourth speaker today who will join us virtually, Mr. Dimas Oki Nugroho, PhD, a socio-political scholar. The floor is yours. Good morning, Mr. Dimas. Your turn, please.
Priska, how are you?
I'm fine, good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Old colleagues here saying hi to each other. Please, Mas Dimas.
Thank you very much. So, can I start right now?
Go ahead, the stage is yours.
Okay, great. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera, shalom, om swastiastu, namo buddhaya, salam kebajikan. Rahayu kita semua. First of all, yang saya hormati Bapak Nur Lemhanas, Bapak Letnan Jenderal TNI Purnawirawan, Bapak Agus Wijoyo, serta seluruh jajaran pimpinan di Lemhanas, teman-teman Kompas TV, dan seluruh audiens, baik offline maupun online dari acara yang luar biasa ini, which is Jakarta Geopolitical Forum 5. If it is possible, can we start the presentations? So I have actually very brief and simple presentations, and now, if it doesn't mind, the committee can start present my PPT or PDF. All right. In the meantime, my topic is about sosiohistoris polarisasi politik dan strategi integrasi nasional di era pandemi COVID-19 dan era transformasi digital. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, Bapak Ibu semua, we are right now facing an age in motion. It is actually inspired by an Indonesian scholar named Takashi Shiraishi from Japan, and he is a very good researcher of Indonesia. And he he tell the readers about the situations that Indonesia experienced at the time when we approaching the independence era in the post World War II. He called it as a age in motion or zaman bergerak. And I think in a certain level, we are facing new situations, same situations that everything is like moving up. And we call it as a new media. When we have transformations from old media to new media, and it has led us to the transformations of old economy to the new economy. When we know new media refers to things like, yes, Internet of Things, and then digital applications and social media as well. And it brings us the new conditions of economy that has facilitate all community to have a sort of sharing economy. And this collective economy has brought about, we call it as a new economy. And more based on community, based on collective actions, yes, and many applications and digitalizations helps the entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs, to do the startup. And now we can say that actually they are the new player of these situations. And the new media leads to new economy and then leads to the new politics because of direct informations, direct media, direct communication between community, and it has also leads to the new community-based economy, collective-based economy, and then it creates a situations that we call it as a new politics. So people right now can participate in the public sphere by two-level game actually. First game is they can do it traditionally by doing sort of political actions, conventionally, but also now social media has helped many citizens and people to express their feeling, to express their participations in order to influence policy-making process. And in many ways, in many examples, we can see actually this new politics very effective in trying to shape the political sphere and the public policy making process. So by telling that, actually we know and we can feel right now that there's a transformation in social, economic, and political realm in the society as well as in the government. And not only in the domestic level, but also in the regional and global level. Well, right now we know we have the pressure of COVID-19 and its massive implication in society. And can we say that these age emotions will transform us to to any particular progressiveness of society, of history, or we actually our people will reject, will resist that lead to the any resistance and conflict story of the society. So this is actually the main questions that we have right now. The committee asked me to send the other presentations.
Anything we can help, Mas Dimas?
Okay. Wait.
While we're waiting for Dimas Okinugroho, facing
Okay.
he is in motion. So please go ahead, Mas
Right.
Dimas.
Things back in order.
Thank you very much. Can we, okay. So the response of the people, when we see there's a motion, there's a transformations, whether we have adaptations that lead to reconciliations and leading to sort of compromise or consensus, then actually the situation will not lead to any conflict and resistance in society. But if people see there's an uncertainty and there's no hope, it will lead, to the grievance and gap that will lead us to the any resistance movement, and of course we experience, many political conflicts that very traumatic as well, that coming from, uncertainty, any disinformations and any gap in society that caused by by the transform the uncertainty. Next. So the questions, I put the question like this: how does Indonesia manage these critical situations? And second, what we can do as a nation dealing with the respective problems and implications given our social, economic, and political historical background experience. And then, based on our political history and current situation of governance, we are experiencing a number of conflictual as well as traumatic cases. And then how we transform this challenge to consolidate and rebuild our social, economic, and political life so that productive on the development of and sustainability of the country. So now, when every country finds COVID-19 as the massive problem, then actually the question is how to respond this in order to ensure the sustainability of any country in the world. So the question is not actually going toward us, Indonesia, but also any country do the same things, how they consolidate. Of course, the consolidations should be based on their own political and socio-anthropological strength and history in order to make a genuine and authentic formula that will be introduced by the government in the first place. Next. So I argue the outbreak of pandemic COVID-19 and its wide implications actually has brought about a twofold impact in a forceful way. So you like or dislike this COVID, first of all, bring a momentum for any country, in particular Indonesia, to refresh and to reshape, better situations in order to, to make this country and this nation state building relevant to the current generations and the future generation as well. Next. Okay, first at the superstructural political level. So this is at the ideological and the political cultural level. Yeah, it could have forcibly reshaped the historical polarizations of Indonesian politics and ideological streaming towards a so-called social political alignment. Why I am so optimistically telling that there's a alignment? So I see actually, this is according to any journals that I read, the journal that telling the story of how the government, how the country tried to respond to COVID-19, like Italy, recently when they have a problem, COVID, the very high fatality rate due to COVID, then there's no other way for them to, in order to respond this, to anticipate this by, unifying, aligning the political set. So it needs two actually aspects that need to be done by a nations, not only by the government to push the agenda, but also the consciousness, the true consciousness of the people. So they match in the middle, yeah, in the middle. So not only top down by the government, but also, bottom up by the society. I consider the consciousness is actually already there because the people we have, or yes, we have still, traumatic generations, if I can say, that still, very politicized and polarized by ideological perspective in their own political behavior. But now we have a younger generations, many of them, like almost 60% of the populations, they have no traumatic and conflictual perspective of, of their own political behavior or attitude. So they have a very fresh political generations that thinks Indonesian can be built optimistically by, doing sort of collaborations, using new media, new economy, and new politics, of course. So this alignment actually is unprecedented, yes, unprecedented situations, but also actually it is a self-fulfilling as well. This is a bit normative, but actually this is the momentum that uh, we have to find a political formula that can facilitate and stimulate the younger generations to be more active in public sphere. So, yeah, whether the so-called political and ideological alignment is promoted by the state or the society, it still needs to be more investigated. So this is the actually still research questions on me, or maybe or civil society or maybe government in Indonesia recently, whether the state is already aware that they can actually promote sort of a better political formula to align the polarizations of the political and cultural ideology, let's say. Given our cebong versus kampret situations, now actually the government should have more issue, should have more agenda to 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 realize and to manifest the needs to be aligned as many other country do that in responding the COVID-19 and the implication. And and due to the crisis caused by pandemic, Indonesian conflicting political ideological spectrum is forced to be compromised and turned towards centrum and moderate. So we hope that actually there's no polarizations when we have the same enemy, which is COVID, and we have the same enemy, the problem of welfare, the problem of the inequality that can happen because of pandemic. And second, at the infrastructure level, the state must be able to consolidate and improve its governance capacity in serving and protecting community, providing data. Data is our main problem, of this government. So in order to make sure that we have a tepat guna, tepat sasaran of welfare assistance, so we need to make sure that our data is true and solid. And also there's a pressure to government to be able, to be more capable in delivering welfare and responding crisis, both, excuse me, I can see both in the policy making and taking action in the field. So next. So I argue, in order to be successful in dealing with the recent situations, call it as, pandemic and the downturn, digital economy transformations, as Mr. Gita and previous speakers said, and about new economy and new politics. So Indonesia, with all its historical fragmentations and given political problems, has to redevelop its strategy in strengthening and consolidating the nation-state building, so that relevant for transforming Indonesia to the new era. Next. Well, according to our political history, every leaders in different times have tried to set and introduce a respective political formula in order to ensure that their government can run effectively well as expected. First, they try to unify Indonesian different range of ideological and political cultural issues, from doing persuasions to coercions. So, government introduced the political socialization strategy and national integration, so-called policy, from government level to community level in a massive way. So it is actually very normative that any government or any leader should find a formula to unify and to fix the superstructure level of the country in order to make sure that their agenda of government can be run smooth and well. So the stability is number one, actually, in the perspective of a fragmented society. But whether they do it by persuasions or coercions, so this is the puzzle. And according to a political science doctrine, we call it, so every leader should have should build a political order. Yeah, this political order need to be built and implemented in order for them to do the mandate from the people to govern and to achieve the target of the government. So second, government also undergo a governance strengthening as well as bureaucracy improvement capacity to serve people at the infrastructure level. Next. So we can see two examples of this. President Sukarno, during Demokrasi Terpimpin, developed a handmade syncretic ideological formula that he thinks at the time will suit the Indonesian needs for a political balance, given strong polarizations and contradictions between political streaming in society, and given the geopolitical pressures for Indonesia in the context of early Cold War. So every leader has their own history, and they have, their own historical challenge to resolve. So at the time, the problem of President Sukarno as a president of a new country in the context of new era, how he tried to unify and how he tried to we can call it to manipulate the difference, the sharp difference in the society and in the political sphere, in the political life. And President Sukarno has a very good background as an intellectual and as a leader. In a socio-anthropological frame, we call it as a solidarity maker. So he tried to reconcile people, and by his knowledge, experience, and perspective of traditional Indonesia, that he can syncretic reconcile all the ideological contradictions, and by doing that, he expect that he can, promote the balance of Indonesian politics. But again, the context is also geopolitical, not only domestic. So this is the challenge of President Sukarno, how he tried to balance in the domestic level, but also he tried to do sort of reconciliations as well, by, let's say, using the historical block of the third country, of the development country in the post-colonial context, and put him as a leader. But President Suharto maybe doing more concrete way, more concrete way. I think if we see what President Suharto did is more, what we see the first vice president Muhammad Hatta did as administrator, as a manager of the country, of the government. So President Suharto, seeking for more political stability, he placed Pancasila as a single ideology. So what President Suharto did, different with the President Sukarno, President Sukarno is very sensitive on socio-anthropological context of his people. But President Suharto tried to improve, to strengthen the institutions of the state, the institutions of the political, political set. So Pancasila as a single ideology, as a symbol, but also he do the indoctrinations of the private political system to every level of society. And he also tried to anticipate any possible ideological and political fight as the most priority policy of his government. And he strengthened political development by consolidating institutions of the state and simplify the political life, and doing so-called indoctrinations of private policy system to every level and run the development approach, developmentalism approach of Indonesian social economy to grow. So every leader has their own formula in order to respond the challenge of the era. Next. Well, this is, I think, the last slide of my presentation. So in recent challenging era, we are facing so many transformations and related implications for the country. Yeah. So in terms of technology, economy, culture, and politics. But I believe, since we have 270 million populations, and we have 64 millions out of the total populations, ranging 16 to 59 years old, as our demographic reality right now. So it means we have an opportunity to grow and to consolidate our political life from different perspectives. And so we can use actually this productive youth with all their characteristics, given our, given the situations of new media, new economy, and new politics. We have more fresh generations that has no traumatic and conflictual situations in their head and in their mind. So we can do actually more, certain approach of political nation-state building, that relevant to current context. I consider millennial youth of current Indonesia is the opportunity for us to democratically refresh and improve our political quality and ideological unifications. And by doing that, we can also improve our social and economic development. So I don't want to say actually really democratic, because in the reality, government can do any tools in order to, and it is legitimate in order to develop the country and to strengthen and to protect the country. But in the recent context, we call it as a collaboration. So it needs a collaboration approach between persuasions and coercions. But at the first place, the state and the civil society should have a trust each other in order to unify. So we need, a different perspective or relevant perspective or approach in order to strengthen, the political formula to reconcile Indonesian polarization, using the new generations. So this is the momentum. Pandemic is the momentum, the best momentum to find and implement such a new political formula. According to every countries in the world, when they find this pandemic as the massive and very, strong pressure, so they find the common enemy of the country, and they try to consolidate their country, the government, the society, the economy, and even the ideology, to find and to build the trust, and to build a new formula to reset and to reshape, the approach of the country to transform. So by saying that, in my first introductions of discussions, so if government cannot use this as the opportunity, I think it is not really good, for the country to optimize the situations. So by saying this, I would like to say that yes, we have problems, politically, technocratically, bureaucratically, and we have problem at the level of governance, and we have a problem on the polarizations of political and ideological issues, cebong versus kampret things, and and all the traditional conflictual and traumatic streams. But now we need a combinations, we need a collaborations, of approach and of a generation as well, because not only youth, we need not only youth, but also the coordinations between elder generations, previous generations that have knowledge, experience, virtue, but we need also a power to to push and to inspire younger generations to make our country better and relevant in the recent and future context. So this is my introductions. Hopefully we can elaborate more in the discussion level. Thank you very much, guys.
All right, thank you very much, Mas Dimas Oki Nugroho. Can we give him a live and virtual round of applause, please, ladies and gentlemen? Thank you very much indeed for enlightening us, providing us with perspectives of the socio-cultural and political landscapes of our nations throughout different periods of time from different presidents as well, and even more relatable with the current ongoing fight of the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you very much indeed for the insights. And we do have the question and answer session coming up. However, we have also very special honorable guest joining us, Friska.
Yep.
I would like to say hi to.
Would like to welcome our honorable guest, Letnan Jenderal TNI Wisnu Prasetya Budi as Koordinator Staf Ahli Kepala Staf Angkatan Darat atau Kors Ahli Kasat. Good morning.
We are also honored to be joined by Asrena Kasal Mabes Angkatan Laut Laksda TNI Abdul Rashid.
We deliver a warm welcome to Irjen Pol Purnawirawan Garcia Nipar.
And also good morning and welcome Pangko Armada I Laksda TNI Arsyad Abdullah.
Welcome to Prof. Dr. Armaidi Armawi MSI, Guru Besar UGM Yogyakarta.
And also with us this morning, Majen TNI Dr. Andus Nugraha Sulistyo Budi, Staf Ahli Politik Kemhan.
Also good morning and welcome to Dr. Anhar Gonggong, Sejarawan.
All right. And we'd like to also express our appreciations to all of the participants out there. And please continue on to type in your questions, your comments, and your observations in the chat box.
And you can also use a raise hand button.
Yes.
To talk to our speakers directly. So please do not hesitate to tap raise hand button on your screen, and our team will help choose who will have the opportunity to interact with our speakers.
All right. Friska and also ladies and gentlemen, I think our team has curated and selected some of the most prominent questions for today. Would you like to begin with the first one, Priska?
Thank you so much, Rahmat. First question from Raja E. Girsang from Corps Marinir. My question to Professor Donald K. Emerson: what is your opinion regarding the involvement of military role in handling the pandemic COVID-19? Is it will undermine our democracy system? On the other hand, Indonesia's strategy combating pandemic is one of the most succeed to reduce the number of people infected. So what is your statement, Prof. Donald, please? Oh, I'm sorry, your microphone is still muted.
Could you please turn on your microphone, Professor, to answer the question?
Sorry about that. Okay.
Okay, please,
Sorry.
Professor Donald.
Okay, that's a very good question. That's an extremely good question. I wish I had a full and satisfactory answer, but I will answer it to the best of my ability. It does seem to me that some of the rules that preceded the current administration in Indonesia have been changed a little bit. For example, the notion that the civilian leadership, for example, in the Department of Defense, should be thoroughly civilian, right? In other words, not retired military officers. Here in the United States, we do make a big deal about the separation of civilian authority and the superiority of civilian authority over the authority of active duty military officers. And then there's, of course, the police. One can ask the question, to what extent are the activities in which the military may be involved activities that actually could be done by the police? Because, of course, the police is a civilian organization as opposed to the military. A lot of this has to do with images of the past. Let's remember dwi fungsi, right? Dwi fungsi. And of course, one of those functions was normal for militaries around the world, and that's national defense. But the other one, you could say, was just about everything else: society, economy, politics. And so it's understandable that observers inside Indonesia and also outside Indonesia, begin to wonder a little bit. Not that we're going to go back to that kind of a military dominance, military prominence, but perhaps nudge a little bit in that direction. And I think that worries people who are committed to the notion of civilian rule in a democratic political system.
Okay, thank you so much for the insights from Professor Donald.
Okay, let's move now to question number 2 from Ending Fajar. The question is to Pak Gita. Could you please compare the effectiveness or the success of democracy, e.g. India, versus autocracy, e.g. China, in coping or facing technological disruptions or disruptive innovation? Thank you. Over to you, Pak Gita.
Thank you, Fajar, for the question. I think it's pretty clear in that China as an autocracy has existed in a good way. And I would argue that the goodness that we're seeing in terms of China, or how China has behaved as an autocracy, has more to do with how China has been able to democratize talents. And this was basically pioneered by the thinking of, Deng Xiaoping in 1978, where he made a big deal about, what it would take for the reforms for China to take place. And the principal notion that was basically conveyed in that 2.5-hour speech was that, they needed to democratize talents. They needed to shift away from patronage. So I would argue for the point that, irrespective of what ideological orientation you would go for, I think it is important for any ideology, be it autocracy or democracy, to make sure that there is always a continuation of the democratization of talent, the democratization of ideas. And I say this with full sensitivity that nobody's perfect. China is not perfect. China has got issues, and I can caveat this. Whereas on the other hand, India has existed as a democracy for a very long time. Indonesia has not been a democracy for as long as India has been. But India has not been able to democratize talents as well, as quickly, as much, and as many as China has been. And this is depicted, empirically in how they've been progressing, economically, and also as a geopolitical power. I don't say this, I'm not assuming that India is not making any, amendments to how they're trying to reshape democracy. So that's the first observation, in terms of comparing where China and India stack up as both an autocracy vis-a-vis democracy. The second observation I would like to make is that I think it is becoming more difficult by way of how we have seen the first and second derivatives increasing. Technologically, the world has moved in a big direction in terms of speed and acceleration. And the more the first and second derivatives are increasing, the more we're all exposed to errors, margin of error. And I've made the point earlier in that not only does the margin of error increase, but the colossal nature of any error taking place within that margin of error is going to be even bigger than what we would have seen in the First World War or the Second World War, both of which would have eaten up more than 100 million lives. And I think we're exposed to this to the extent that we are failing in democratizing ideas and talents, be it as a democracy or as an autocracy. We're going to be more exposed to a bigger margin of error. So I think it's important to basically inculcate the necessary values so that we can have the necessary minds. With those minds, we can actually manage technological capabilities in a benign manner. I want to just point out again that the internet was so explosive just by way of being able to grow at 60% per year throughout a 30-year period. And this has basically manifested in the divergence between the linearity of policymaking, which has not been able to keep up with the exponentiality of the private sector. I think the depiction of this was so stark when we saw the testimonies, that were involving Facebook, where many of the legislators in the United States were not understanding, how the digital platform was performing, and much less how to manage the, exponential nature of growth within that digital space. And blockchain has been growing in the last 15 years at double the rate that the internet was growing. It's growing at about 120% per year. So it's only going to create a higher degree of exponentiality, which I think will make it more difficult for policy making to try to manage and regulate anything that's happening in the digital space.
So it is a challenge for policymakers.
Thank you very much, Pak Gita Aguriawan, for the elaboration on democracy versus autocracy, Friska.
Yeah. For the third question, our third participant will ask directly to our speakers, Raihan Darmawan. Please mention your question and also to whom your question referred to. Raihan?
Let me introduce first.
Okay, please.
Yeah, my name is Raihan Darmawan and I'm from UPN Veteran Jakarta. I would like to ask this question to all participants. But before I asking the question, is it okay if I asking in bahasa?
Okay, it is alright.
Okay. The question is, apa yang menjadi masalah signifikan di bidang budaya dan peradaban yang timbul akibat munculnya peradaban baru? So that's my question. Thank you.
To whom it refers to? Untuk siapa ditujukannya, Mas Raihan?
I think it was to everyone.
All speakers.
Oke, salah satu boleh dipilih.
Pilih satu.
Because we have a limited time. Sorry.
Okay, I think Mr. Gita.
Okay, to Pak Gita.
Yeah.
Sure. Thank you, Raihan. Let me point out that inequality has risen, right? And I have been arguing and hypothesizing that inequality is correlated with how polarizations in conversations have increased. And a large part of the reason for this is how we are over consuming on our digital space to the point we do not have individually and collectively digital hygiene, right? The lack of digital hygiene basically correlates with how our culture will be affected. The rise of inequality will further exacerbate our culture. And all of these collectively will exacerbate our civilization. And I think the real mockery or tragedy of this is that Indonesia is one of the oldest civilizations in the world. I would argue that Indonesia and Southeast Asia have existed, in a pretty good way in the last 2,000 years. And Indonesia could actually serve as a civilizational bridge between a new civilization, call it the United States, which has been around for only a little over 200 years, vis-a-vis China, which has been around for 4,000 to 5,000 years, vis-a-vis Europe, which has been around for a few thousand years. Indonesia has a damn good chance only and only if we can remedy, if not better improve our culture and civilization. The only way to do it going forward is if we were to have better digital hygiene by way of staying away from this philosophy that freedom of speech is actually equivalent to algorithmic amplification. We're spending 8 hours a day looking at our screen on our mobile phone. We sleep for 8 hours, we work for 8 hours. At the rate we're spending 8 hours a day on our screen time, it only means that we're not spending quality time with family members, with friends, and our collective stakeholders, because a lot of those 8 hours are spent on garbage, whether it's TikTok or Instagram reels that are just complete virtualization of the actual realities. The reason why we spend a lot of time on Instagram reels and TikToks is because those are virtualizations and augmentation of the actual realities. All these will dovetail into how our culture will be affected. Not to mention, if there is inequality to the point where we are not able to control and manage it down anymore, there is likely to be a formation of a useless species or a superfluous species. And that will only exacerbate how and our ability to basically put and pull everybody together. All these will correlate with our civilizational propensity to the point as a civilization, we're not going to be a great civilization. To the point as a civilization, we're not going to be great at being an interlocutor amongst or between civilizations.
Okay, so it could be harm to our culture and civilization. So the biggest challenge is how to have a digital hygiene.
Daily challenges indeed. Thank you so much, Pak Gita Urayan, for touching on the great impacts of the changes of culture towards our civilizations. And we are now opening our mic to the next questions from the Academy of the Navy. Bagi teman-teman dari Akademi Angkatan Laut, silahkan mic-nya dibuka. Sudah kami buka untuk bertanya kepada narasumber. Go ahead.
Asking to permission to asking.
Okay.
My name is
Can you mention your name, please, first?
Yes, my name is Naila Asmani,
Okay, Naila.
Sergeant Operational Cadet I'm from Naval Academy, Bumimoro, Surabaya. I would like to ask some questions for Professor Donald Emerson. The first question is, in your opinions, what's the government solution to keep prosperity balance in the future between the people who can contribute by their technology creations? Then there is also the people who can't create anything, but they also can't give their force anymore because of its technology. And the second question is there a possibility lowering the value of democracy when the technology more developed and replace human job? Thank you.
All right, thank you. Naila, over to you, Professor Donald, please.
Yeah, well, again, I think this is probably a little closer to Gita's specialty than mine. It does seem to me that there is a divide, if I understand the question correctly, between those that Gita referred to as, 8 hours on phones and very deeply involved in the technology, and those who are outside the technology. And the problem is that that becomes invidious, right? That the people who are plugged in have more power, more access, more connections, they can be more effective than the people, perhaps people in the countryside as opposed to in the urban areas. And that can lead to alienation on the people who feel left out. I think here in the United States, definitely, if you scan the country between the two coasts, right, between the West Coast and the East Coast, there are people in the middle of the country that really don't have that kind of access. And so I'm not sure what Gita really means by the democratization of talent. That's an interesting phrase. But I do think that the democratization of the distribution of access, technological access, is really important. So there, just as there are people in Indonesia who still don't have savings accounts. One wants to make the economic system inclusive of those individuals so that they can save money for expenses that they have. And similarly, technological literacy, maybe that's what Gita means by democratizing talent, I'm not sure, but talent is different than education. I think education is really crucial. And I want to say one other thing with regard to Gita's idea that Indonesia could become somehow a bridge civilization between the civilizations, let's say, in the United States or the West on the one hand, and their counterparts in China. And he talked about changes inside Indonesia that would make that possible. Okay, fair enough. But I want to add this point. Panchasila has legs. In other words, Panchasila can appeal to societies, the Indian society, for example, that need to deal with pluralism in a way that Indonesia has tried to and has to some significant extent succeeded. We know that in a way the Sanskrit, Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, is sort of a translation, not quite, of the Latin, e pluribus unum, which is the motto here in the United States. Now, as far as bridging with China, there's a problem because China is really an ethnic civilization. It's an ethno-state. Han Chinese are dominant pretty much across the board, economically, politically, culturally, and so on. And so you don't, admittedly, there are minorities in places like Xinjiang where they're suffering terribly under pressure from the government, which is basically trying to not exactly destroy, but reshape Islam in Xinjiang. And I could go on about the minorities. So there would have to be some other reason for Indonesia to appeal to China. I can think of a number of them, but that would take me too much time to elaborate. So I just wanted to make that comment.
All right, thank you very much, Professor Darnold, for the explanation.
The next to the last question from Nur Asia Malik. Please open your microphone and ask directly to our speaker. And please mention to whom speaker you would like to address your question, please. Ibu Nur Asia Malik, can you hear us? Okay, please open your microphone.
Oke, terima kasih untuk semua pengisi acara dan berbicara. Saya Nur Asia Malik, saya dari Universitas Indonesia. Saya ingin bertanya, sebenarnya sejauh mana kita menjalankan kodrat atau fitrah kita sebagai manusia dalam menjaga keharmonisan budaya di tengah krisis multidimensi akibat pandemi COVID-19 saat ini. Saya bertanya untuk Bapak Dimas Oki.
Oke, baik. Terima kasih Mbak Nur Asia. Silakan Mas Dimas.
Keharmonisan budaya dalam situasi seperti ini.
Betul.
Well, maybe I can respond question of Nur Asia in English and in Bahasa as well, if you don't mind. Well, Mbak Nur Asia, this is great when we know that Pak Gita said about the civilizations of Indonesia that can be right now, promoted as the alternative. This is my understanding. Well, I agree with that, but again, the situation, as Prof. Donald said, that the polarizations of Indonesia is a challenging situation, bahkan sampai sekarang. So, well, we have situations. This is our takdir as not only as a collective community, as Indonesians, but also as an individual, that the consciousness being Indonesia is very multi-layers. So in terms of socio-anthropological situations, that being Indonesian is not simple as maybe as let's say, as other countries experience. So the takdir of the pluralisasi of Indonesia actually can be managed, yeah, what I'm trying to tell, by a political formula, by the state. So the consciousness as an individual, individual, base of citizenship, as well as community base of citizenship, can be promoted by the government at the first place, of course. We tried before during Presiden Soekarno, di masa Presiden Soekarno, and also di masa Presiden Soeharto. But very interestingly, during President Gus Dur, the government tried to give the authority of the meaning making to the people, not dominated by the government as well. So this experience actually can enrich our consciousness as a citizen and as a civil society, in order to, okay, the government has authority to do this and that because they have a mandate of, by the people. In terms of, democratic or non-democratic system, the government have a mandate to govern. And the civil society right now, and this is very, very good when Prof. Donald said this is about education. So education is not, it doesn't mean that it's only, in class, but also, out class experience. So they learn from the past. They learn from the situation right now. They learn Presiden Soekarno, Pak Harto, Gus Dur, Habibie, SBY, Ibu Mega, dan Jokowi. They learn, how the dynamics of the government and the political situations, how dealing with other people, how dealing with different community of the people. They learn about social media very quick. Thesis, antithesis, and synthesis is, going very fast in the at the same time. So younger generations, they consume informations, they consume idea, whether it is hoax or not. It makes them, what I say as in Pancasila maybe tell us about hikmah kebijaksanaan, wisdom. So if we talk about democracy or non-democracy system, if we have no wisdom in our heart, in our mind, in terms of institutionalizations of politics and also individual base of citizenships, so I don't think that there is a true democracy and true government as well, true governance. So wisdom, according to Pancasila, is the main issue that we need to be, find out. So wisdom also, and this is good for us during the pandemic situations, that pressure is a lot. And the transformations, and it is good since we have a transformation of digitalizations of things, of industry, of economy, of people, of agriculture. And we like pressure. By saying that, we have pressure, then we can learn what we have to do in combining two perspectives, state government level, perspective, but also the consciousness, the true consciousness of the people, by finding a more genuine formula to unify this country. In, so by saying this, I want to tell you that it is impossible Indonesia maju kalau tidak bersatu. But how to make it bersatu? How to make it a genuine and a solid civilizations? Then we have to find a formula to do the consensual and to compromise that we have the plurality, but it can be worked if we have a formula that can be run. And I think the anak muda right now, we can use this as the opportunity, anak muda, and also a few good men, between the older generations that can actually transform the young generation and also this nation state, these nations to be more relevant in the recent and the future context. So anak muda has to be used, and by educations, by social economy, and also there's a responsibility of the government to do this, but not only the government, the leader have to be able to reconcile and to merangkul, every elements, different elements, not only by coercive, but also persuasions, but also legitimate approach of the people to consolidate. So we talk beyond the, cebong versus kampret era.
Okay.
So this is the time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, Mas. And next up, we have question from Deka Yusuf, Sergeant Cadet from Naval Academy. This is to Mr. Baskara. How do you believe that technology, especially AI or artificial intelligence, can threaten humanity in a way that can replace a human when humans themselves that create AI? So what kind of technology can do things like replace a human in the future? Thank you. All right. Mr. Baskara, your response, please.
Mr. Baskara, would you please to answer this straightly and also shortly? Thank you.
Right.
Yes. Thank you very much for the question. I think this is not only a question from the Navy cadets, but I think it's a question for all of us. Well, two things. Number one, yes, it is true that technology is a human creation. Technology is human creation. That's number one. But number two, as mentioned by the previous speakers, technology now is different from the past. In the past, technology was there to help us. So it's useful as long as we were using it. But now with the so-called artificial intelligence, with algorithm and things like that, technology is more than just something. It can, the term is used as learning machine. It can learn something. And in that case, technology is not just a tool, but sometimes it can, quote unquote, control us. Just like what Dr. Kitawariawan was saying. Now we spend many hours in a day just to serve the need of the tool, the smartphone or other things, and less communication, direct communication with other family members, with other fellow human beings. I think in that case, technology is quite, quote unquote, dangerous. I want to say that technology is a good slave, but it's a bad master.
All right. All right. Thank you very much, Pak Baskara. And we have come to the end of the question and answer session, Friska. I guess, ladies and gentlemen, we have deliberated on a multitude of aspects of life, both past and present, that have shaped our civilization throughout the history. And I guess it's safe and obvious to say that everything that we do, every little thing that we interact with will contribute significantly and even fundamentally to the shaping of our civilizations. How and where it's going, it remains to be seen. Maybe by the children of our children of our children, Friska.
And also about technology,
Yeah.
the main measurement is still the humanity in our earth. So how we could have a wisdom to use that, and also already discussed comprehensively about how to build collective awareness of the urgency of building a culture and civilization. Those values embrace universally the essence of the human values. So it is the end of our discussion for this morning.
Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of this session. So once again, we would like to thank you all for your questions and your participations. And indeed, it has been exciting and a fruitful session.
And we would like to extend our highest appreciation to our speakers, Mr. Gita Wiryawan, Professor Donald K. Emerson, Mr. Baskara Tuluswardaya, Mr. Dimas Oki Nugroho. We also thank them for their insights and wisdom, and we wish them all the best in pursuing their visions, and also may they always inspire others like what they have done in this session, of course.
All right. And we have tackled some big questions in this first session, and we have gained extraordinary views about humanity and civilization. Third sessions rather, Friska. And of course, we will continue to digest these views and these informations as we draw inspirations from them.
Sure, and ladies and gentlemen, may you find this last session to be insightful, and we will see you again. For now, let's go back to Yanda. I'm Friska Clarissa and Rahmat Idris signing out. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Friska, Rahmat, for moderating our last plenary session. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a big round of applause once again to our moderators and our speakers for today. Wow, it was indeed an amazing, remarkable explanation and discussion to wrap up our last and plenary session of the event. Moving on, ladies and gentlemen, as I mentioned earlier, as I promised you earlier, that we believe that there is no better time, to recharge and refresh our mind with a little bit of entertainment. But unfortunately, it will not be me who do it for you, but we have two stand-up comedians that ready to entertain us all. So without making you wait any longer, I will present to you our stand-up comedians, Ali Akbar.
Assalamualaikum. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Excuse me, father, mother. My name is Ali Akbar. I'm sorry, father. I can't speak English full. I can't. Because I'm stupid. Ya, jujur Pak, hari ini saya sangat senang, saya merasa bangga sekali. Ini suatu prestasi saya bisa tampil di depan orang-orang hebat seperti bapak-bapak. Terima kasih banyak. Terima kasih banyak Pak. Karena jujur Pak, saya hanya orang yang datang dari daerah, dari kampung Pak. Saya dari Ternate, Maluku Utara. Ternate itu adalah cuma satu kota kecil Pak yang ada di Maluku Utara. Bahkan saking kecilnya, di peta Ternate itu cuma berbentuk seperti tanda titik. Titik ini, titik yang sering ada di buku, itu Ternate Pak. Istilah Ternate di bawah ini. Itu Pak, Ternate kecil sekali. Jujur saya di Jakarta ini saya sangat rindu Pak dengan orang tua saya. Karena orang tua saya yang paling saya cinta itu adalah my mother. You know what? Because my mother is my avenger. Iya Pak, superhero bagi saya. Karena sejak kecil ibu saya itu rela melakukan apa saja demi saya begitu. Waktu saya belum makan, ibu saya rela tidak makan, yang penting saya itu bisa makan. Walaupun cuma nasi 3 butir. Ketika di kamar cuma ada satu kasur kecil, ibu saya rela saya yang tidur di kasur itu, ibu saya tidur di luar. Dengan bapak saya di kasur yang lebih besar. Sedih saya Pak. Dan bicara tadi kemarin jujur Pak, dihubungin oleh orang Kompas TV, dibilang Ali bisa stand up di depan orang-orang Lemhanas. Saya bilang, elah Allah ini bagaimana, saya panik Pak, serius. Karena saya takut ditembak. Saya takut Pak, jujur. Ya Allah ini bagaimana ini, malah tidak dibilang suruh pakai bahasa Inggris. Dari tadi bahasa Inggris semua, saya tambah panik. Karena begini Pak, jujur dikasih tema juga, Ali nanti bahas tentang ini ya, manusia di simpang peradaban. Jujur Pak, saya tidak ada keresahan sama sekali dengan manusia di peradaban ini. Saya cuma ada keresahan tentang manusia di perempatan. Tahu Pak manusia silver? Jujur Pak, saya pertama kali lihat manusia silver, saya kan dari Ternate datang ke Jakarta, saya lihat ini manusia silver nih, dari mana mereka sebenarnya nih? Kok ada banyak? Saya baca-baca lagi, itu ternyata manusia silver itu dulu ini nih kayak seni. Seni pertunjukan untuk orang-orang biasanya menggunakan itu untuk penggalangan dana. Misalnya ada bencana alam begitu, mereka cat tubuh mereka buat penggalangan dana di jalan-jalan tuh. Tapi sekarang malah digunakan untuk mata pencaharian. Astagfirullah. Enggak, saya takut begini Pak, saya takut orang ada yang enggak tahu. Misalnya orang dari luar negeri datang ke Indonesia, tiba-tiba lihat tuh di perempatan, setiap perempatan ada manusia silver. Kan dia takut ya. Loh, Indonesia sedang tidak baik-baik saja nih. Bencana alam di mana-mana. Manusia silver setiap perempatan Pak. Jujur Pak, saya tidak ada masalah sama sekali dengan manusia silver. Saya cuma takut. Jujur saya pas di lampu merah saya lihat manusia silver itu saya takut dipeluk. Saya takut aja lagi di atas motor, tiba-tiba dia datang ke saya, dia peluk saya yang silver Pak. Dia normal. Lampu hijau dia yang bawa motor. Saya yang minta-minta. Saya takut Pak, jujur kayak begitu tuh. Dan bicara manusia tuh jujur Pak, saya tuh selalu dikasih tahu sama orang tua saya. Ibu saya selalu bilang, Ali kamu harus percaya kalau kita manusia itu pasti akan punya perubahan setiap hidup begitu. Kedepannya tuh pasti akan berubah. Jujur Pak, perubahan yang paling signifikan yang saya alami ketika saya hidup di Jakarta dengan sebelumnya saya di kampung, itu di fisik saya Pak, Bu. Karena semenjak saya di Jakarta ini, saya merasa kalau kulit saya semakin putih. Beda waktu saya di Indonesia Timur kemarin Pak, kulit saya hitam sekali Pak. Waktu SMA hitam berminyak, berdebu Pak, kayak jok motor. Makanya dulu waktu SMA kalau saya di dalam kelas mau bikin contekan di paha itu nggak bisa Pak. Karena warna paha dengan tinta sama. Jadi waktu itu saya nyontek pakai tipek. Dan saya di Jakarta kuliah Pak, saya kuliah di salah satu kampus terbaik yang ada di Indonesia. Saya kuliah di UI. Pengennya begitu Pak. Tapi tidak lulus. Pas tes saya tidak masuk UI, malah masuk angin saya. Tes pulang malam-malam dihantam angin malam. Tapi saya tidak sedih Pak, saya tidak sedih sama sekali tidak diterima di UI. Karena itu bukan kegagalan pertama saya. Banyak sekali kegagalan di dalam hidup saya Pak. Waktu SMP, ini true story Pak, jujur saya tidak lulus ujian nasional. Memang tolol saya Pak. Saya dengar pengumuman waktu itu SMP, saya bilang saya sedih sekali Pak. Saya bilang ya Tuhan kenapa saya tidak lulus. Ditambah lagi pas pulang ke rumah saya dimarah-marahin. Karena saya salah masuk rumah. Saya keluar, saya masuk ke rumah asli saya, orang tua saya sambut saya, mereka bilang, Ali tidak usah sedih. Kamu itu masih muda. Ini adalah keberhasilan yang tertunda. Tapi saya tahu, dalam hati pasti mereka bilang, anak bodoh, bikin malu orang tua. Tahu begini pas lahir mama tukar dengan dispenser saja. Saya tambah sedih Pak, jujur di situ saya down sekali. Saking sedihnya saya masuk kamar, banting pintu kencang-kencang. Saking kencangnya, kebuka lagi. Tapi di saat saya sangat down waktu itu, disitulah Pak, saya tahu artinya sahabat. Karena setelah dengar kabar saya tidak lulus, sahabat saya 3 orang, Yadi, Dani, dan Opan. Tidak penting mereka siapa. Ada sahabat saya. Mereka datang ke rumah, masuk ke kamar, hibur saya Pak. Hibur sampai akhirnya kesedihan saya nih hilang. Waktu saya tahu kalau mereka bertiga juga tidak lulus. Sehat-sehat ya Pak. Karena zaman sekarang kalau batuk nih hati-hati Pak. Yuk, saya tadi disuruh swab, saya swab terus, swab antigen. Ini juga nanti besok saya rencana mau mudik, mau pulang ke kampung, disuruh PCR, antigen sudah tidak berlaku, saya sampai sedih Pak. Harus keluar uang banyak lagi ini. Harus PCR terus gimana apa gunanya kita vaksin kalau disuruh PCR terus. Saya jujur Pak, saya belum menikah saya Pak. Saya belum menikah karena saya belum punya mobil Pak. Karena saya pengen kalau menikah tuh saya punya mobil. Biar bisa jalan dengan anak istri saya pakai mobil. Saya takut kalau jalan dengan anak istri saya pakai motor. Takut apa? Takut sendal anak saya jatuh. Karena sering sekali saya temukan sendal anak kecil jatuh di jalan Pak. Cuma sebelah. Saya yakin ketika sendal itu jatuh, orang tua tuh tidak sadar. Anaknya sadar Pak. Tapi nggak bisa ngomong. Sebenarnya bisa dipegang sendalnya biar nggak jatuh. Cuman takutnya kalau sendalnya dipegang, anaknya yang jatuh. Pak, selamat siang Pak. Lihat Bapak, saya ingat Bapak saya Pak, mirip Pak. Serius Pak, serius Pak. Aduh ya Allah, saya jadi rindu sama Bapak saya. Serius Pak, Bapak saya juga rambutnya udah putih Pak. Serius Pak. Menurut saya Pak, banyak kebiasaan orang Indonesia ini yang sudah jadi kebiasaan buruk. Saking buruknya sudah melanggar peraturan. Banyak orang-orang yang kalau masuk ATM pakai helm Pak. Maksudnya ngapain takut razia? Kan tidak mungkin ada razia di dalam ATM dong. Ada juga nih kebiasaan orang Indonesia Pak. Ini saya sharing. Bapak-bapak pernah beli martabak? Nah, kebiasaan kita kalau beli martabak, entah kenapa kita suka sekali nontonin abangnya pas dia lagi bikin martabak. Abangnya lagi bikin nih. Kita tuh begini. Bahkan ada yang masih pakai helm. Kacanya jatuh diangkat lagi, yang penting fokus. Tapi biasanya kita nggak sendiri tuh Bang. Di samping ada orang, di belakang juga ada. Geser Bang, nggak kelihatan. Maksudnya buat apa kita nonton? Endingnya kita sudah tahu, Bang. Pasti jadi martabak. Berharap apa? Boleh kita nonton kalau di tengah-tengah ada kejutan. Misalnya kita lagi nonton, tiba-tiba abangnya bilang, jangan kemana-mana setelah pesan-pesan berikut. Boleh kita nonton begitu. Tidak cuma martabak, Pak. Orang Indonesia nih, kenapa ya suka sekali nonton hal yang tidak seharusnya ditonton. Orang kecelakaan, Bang. Ditonton. Orang kecelakaan nih, kubrak. Bahkan ada yang masih pakai helm. Kacanya jatuh diangkat lagi, yang penting fokus orang kecelakaan. Biasanya ada yang datang tuh kan, Bang. Datang. Mas, siapa yang kecelakaan? Oh, ini martabak kecelakaan sana. Oh, ya maaf. Mas, siapa yang kecelakaan? Saya. Pak, mohon maaf kalau ada kata-kata yang salah. Sekian dari saya. Terima kasih banyak atas perhatiannya. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selanjutnya ini dia teman saya, dia juara 1 Suci Kompas TV kemarin. Dan dia satu-satunya satpam, Pak, yang berhasil juara stand up komedi. Beri tepuk tangan buat Rio Dumatubun.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Jujur Pak, saya deg-degan nih ketika dihubungi sama Kompas, Mas Rio mau stand up nggak depan Lemhanas, kata dia gitu, acara Lemhanas. Terus saya tanya pesertanya siapa? Ada TNI dan polisi, kata dia itu. Saya kan cuman sapam ya Pak ya. Walaupun seragamnya sama ya kan, sekarang kayak berasa selevel kayaknya saya Pak, seragamnya sama nih ya kan. Tapi kan gaji sama tanggung jawabnya kan beda ya Pak ya. Jujur nih Pak, ini seragam ini tuh saya pakai bangga sekali saya waktu dikasih seragamnya yang mirip polisi gitu. Tapi yang secara nggak sadar gitu, ternyata banyak sapam yang belum siap. Bukannya sapam Pak, masyarakat pun belum banyak yang siap gitu. Saya tahu dari mana, teman saya Pak mau ke Mall Taman Anggrek putar balik, disangka ada razia padahal sapam lagi apel. Cukup bikin panik ya seragam kayak gini ya ternyata ya. Cuman memang banyak sekali teman-teman saya yang merasa sangat bangga sekali pakai seragam mirip sapam nih, banyak banget gitu, yang mirip polisi ini. Saking bangganya Pak, bahkan ada teman saya ini true story, istrinya suruh pakai kebaya seperti Ibu Bayangkara. Dia foto keluarga, suaminya teman saya sapam pakai begini, dipajang di tengah-tengah ruangan tamu. Jadi kalau ada teman-teman dia yang main, tanya, suaminya kerja di mana? Tidak disebut jabatannya, jabatannya nggak cuman begitu aja, udah nggak sebut jabatannya. Saya sadar gitu, kalau istri polisi emang Ibu Bayangkara kan, kalau istri sapam kan Ibu Bayangan ya kan. Iya gitu loh. Jadi jujur saya senang tampil di sini gitu, karena waktu dihubungi sama Kompas katanya dibilang tampil di Lemhanas. Lemhanas adalah Lembaga Ketahanan Republik Indonesia. Kalau bicara ketahanan, kayaknya saya orang paling tepat diundang di sini gitu. Kurang tahan apa saya Pak 15 tahun jadi satpam gitu. Tahan banget kan? Begadang saya tahan. Lapar belum makan saya tahan. Gaji diundur saya tahan. Sampai sekarang masih outsourcing saya tahan. Pokoknya semua saya tahan Pak. Tapi jujur sebagai sapam bank, ketahanan saya itu jebol tuh. Ketika ada ibu-ibu bawa anak kecil datang ke bank, anaknya nangis, ibu-ibunya bilang, jangan nangis kamu, sapamnya galak. Itu saya jebol ketahanan saya Pak. Karena gini Mas, saya cuma diem doang di pintu tapi difitnah. Jangan nangis kamu, sapamnya galak, saya diem itu loh. Gak gitu, gak diem saya. Waktu seragam saya mirip polisi, sekarang diganti mirip polisi, saya pikir, kayaknya gak ada lagi ibu-ibu kayak gini. Ternyata masih ada loh. Dia datang bawa anaknya nangis. Tahu ibu bilang apa? Cuman kata-katanya cuma dirubah doang. Jangan nangis kamu, polisinya galak. Itu kan 2 kali difitnah berarti saya. Satu, pertama saya bukan polisi, kedua saya memang nggak galak gitu. Emang ada ibu-ibu kayak gitu tuh. Terus ya, kalau ngomongin budaya gitu ya, kayak ini budaya banget yang melekat di orang-orang kita gitu. Kenapa sih orang-orang kita tuh kalau ngelihat sapam bawaannya pengen nanya, bener nggak? Kalau ngelihat polisi bawaannya takut ditanya, bener ya? Ini kalau ngelihat sapam bawaannya pengen nanya, kalau ngelihat polisi bawaannya takut ditanya gitu. Ini saya jelasin satu-satu ya Bu. Saya sadar gitu sebagai sapam tuh saya sumber informasi pertama, sadar saya. Jadi kenapa orang kalau ngelihat sapam bawaannya pengen tanya. Saya sadar kalau saya sapam adalah sumber informasi pertama, saya sadar. Tapi kan yang harus orang-orang tahu, nggak semua hal saya tahu ya kan. Nggak semua hal sapam tahu loh. Ini pernah kejadian pagi-pagi, saya lagi beli bubur ayam pakai seragam lengkap kayak gini nih. Tiba-tiba ada orang naik motor mampir di depan saya bilang, Mas, ruko sebelah siapa yang punya ya? Ya mana saya tahu ya kan? Saya kan cuma sapam Pak, Bu, bukan Google loh. Walaupun saya tahu di Google ada security-nya, cuman kan saya nggak akrab ya. Maksudnya aneh orang-orang kayak gini. Terus yang kedua nih, kenapa orang kalau ngelihat polisi, bawaannya takut ditanya. Nah ini saya nggak berani komediin nih Bu. Pak, karena menurut saya polisi sekarang sudah humanis ya kan. Sudah memanusiakan manusia, tepuk tangan dong buat polisi Indonesia. Supaya kerja saya aman. Ini terakhir dari saya Pak, karena waktu ya. Saya tuh jadi sapam udah 15 tahun. Setiap tahun dapat seragam 3. Berarti hari ini saya udah punya 45 seragam sapam. Buat apa Pak Bu? Banyak banget loh itu. Saya sampai kepikiran apa saya giveaway kali ya. Karena jarang ada sapam bagi-bagi merchandise kan jarang ya. Mungkin saya orang pertama kali gitu. Tapi yang lebih absurd lagi, saya punya 45 periwitan sapam. Lebih nggak ada gunanya loh itu. Saya rasa polisi di sini juga nggak mungkin punya 45 kan. Saya sapam punya 45 Pak. Maksudnya saya gini loh, nggak ada sapam terlambat kerjanya bingung besok pakai periwitan yang mana, nggak ada loh. Maksud saya gini, ini 45 periwitan sapam, kalau saya bagiin tetangga saya satu. Satu kampung saya Pak Bu, jadi wasit. Nama saya Rio, terima kasih. Semoga Kak Ibu Bapak-Bapak sehat semua di sini. Terima kasih.
Round of applause for them, our stand-up comedians. Thank you very much, Rio and Aldi, for your time. Ladies and gentlemen, moving on, distinguished guests, as we are approaching the end of the event, we would like to kindly request for Professor Dadan Umar Daihani, DA, as an expert staff of the National Resilience Institute of the Republic of Indonesia, to deliver the summary of our forum. For Professor Dadan, the podium and stage is yours. Silakan, Prof.
Thank you very much, Yanda. Good day, everybody. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat siang, salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan. Honorable the Governors of Lemhanas RI, Lieutenant General Agus Wijoyo, Honorable the Deputy Governor of Lemhanas RI, Air Marshal Wiko Sofian, Honorable Secretary of Lemhanas RI, Komjen Polisi Purwadi Arianto, Honorable speakers and moderator, distinguished participants, and their colleagues. Please allow me mention a lovely remark from Johann Huizinga before I deliver the final note. If we are to present a culture, we must continue to create it. If we are to preserve culture, we must continue to create it. Ladies and gentlemen, the Jakarta Geopolitical Forum GGF 2021 conducted over 2 days from October 21 to 22, 2021. It is very difficult to say 2021. Gather a variety of fascinating and strategic thought and perspective on world geopolitics in the futures, particularly from the standpoint of civilization and global culture order. Are we becoming more civilized? Are we becoming more human? What are the long-term tendencies that are of concern to the world? And what is the best approach to cope with it for humanity? What lesson learned can be gained from strengthening the Indonesian humanity and nationality? Those a set of questions discussed in this forum entitled Culture and Civilization, Humanity at the Crossroad. Even though there is no broad consensus, both international and Indonesian speakers, I believe in this forum, agree that the fate of human existence on this planet must be promote the idea, what I call humanizing human. The following are among the view note we can acquire. First, we are presently confronted with two game changers at the same time, both of which have the potential to reshape the landscape of human life of our planet. The first is the tremendous technological advancement. The second is the COVID-19 pandemic, which has shocked and destroyed the world. In technological speaking, we are nowadays in the digital era, which has changed the pattern of human life. Digitization, in many sense, affects not just how humans work, but also how they think. Technology is a human invention that was created with the intention of improving and facilitating humankind. We dance, cheered, and delight when James Watt succeeded in creating the steam engine. As a result of industrialization, humans no longer work with their muscle, but rather with their mind. Technology, like a two-edged sword, has a flip side, because if it is nearly uncontrolled development, technology has created doubt about human destiny. As a result of technological development, there is a risk that people as individuals will lose their identity or become increasingly reliant on the global network controlled by the ruler of administrator of technology in the futures. It is possible that man may face personal and societal catastrophe as a result of his creation technology advancement. Human beings appear to be chased by their own invention. The question is, will technological advancement make a people as a master of technology, or opposite, we are the slave of technology? Autonomous robotization has infiltrated many lives, from providing ordinary human existence to producing war weapons. With the introduction of robot troops, guided and directed by artificial intelligence, this autonomous system will definitely be a driving factor in the creation of new habits, which will eventually lead to establishment of a new culture. We are now approaching the period of Society 5.0, in which we must become comfortable to engaging with robots. The second major changes is the presence of COVID-2, or coronavirus, also known as the coronavirus. This tiny particle has wreaked on the order of human life. The world looked to be a state of global fear. The corona appears to have removed cross-national dependency as shown by the creation of worldwide economic supply chains. Even narrow ultranationalism is growing rapidly in countries that are apprehensive of one another, as if the world spirited into my world or your world. But even though the universe belongs to all of us. Another note is the pandemic forced us to alter our behavior and lifestyle. We must adopt social distancing lifestyle as part of our health routine. Social engagement is increasingly divided by space, but thanks to the technology, we can reconnect in our communication. To survive after the pandemic, a new normal lifestyle is required. That is what humans aim to a wiser human life. The COVID-19 outbreak has been impacting individuals all across the world for over 2 years and is still going on today. On either side, rampages and viral mutation do not dim humanity's hope once it is equipped with knowledge. Humanity has gradually, by steadily evolved beyond gravity and the ability to deal with the threat of pandemic. Vaccine, the discovery of new medicine, and the awareness of the pandemic virus ever increasing nature all contributed to tragic turning point. Whole genome sequencing, edited genome sequencing can tell the story of the character of the viral mutation. And people are now disclosing more about the futures. At the post-pandemic period began of reveal, even a society evolved, science appeared to humanity's major tool for preserving survival. Change is unavoidable. It is the only constant of the world. As a result of civilization, are inextricably linked and historically distinct. In an era of global technology that can penetrate the boundaries of space, civilizational inequalities are becoming more evident. The truth of today, man's civilization is the cultural and civilization synergy has been a continuous to exist. Our primary concern with civilization is the area of health, environment, and population growth for human abilities from different civilizations can come together in the form of civilization synergy that is a glimpse of optimism. The world today is on the brink of a major upheaval. The climate crisis is ongoing. Global awareness of environmental issues and global warming is growing in some circle. As a result of this challenge, new type of violent radicalism may emerge, what we call the ecological terrorism. Tension concerning national identity in the West and religious identity in emerging national activism to raise among the less educated. The competition for control of resources and market, particularly between the failing US and the surging China, has the capability to vent narrow nationalism and stifle any global management effort in response to global concern. Indonesia makes a substantial contribution to the synergy of the civilization. Indonesia is a fascinating nation with a diverse population. There is religious variety, ethnic diversity, cultural diversity. Indonesia is governed by a democracy in the Indonesian manner, an Indonesian way, with Indonesian features, value, and civilization. This indicates that democracy is possible with different religious and civilizational heritage. But the harmony requires preparation and legal tradition that are consistent with national religious tradition as well as respect acknowledgement. National and religious ideology should become the glue that bind the world population together, especially at this in this array moment, like the present. As this array moment like the present. However, these two ideologies have differences. Religious ideology is transnational, while national ideology is national. Beware of the demographic changes in multi-religions area, and don't let an institution or religious group turn itself into defender of social justice, unless has strong democratic credential, better to prevent that cure. Finally, we must consider a new equilibrium, a new normal, and strike a balance between an adaptive attitude toward change and opposition to change. Nobody knows what may happen in the future, but we must continue to strive to live a dignified or civilized life. Ladies and gentlemen, we are aware of countless grain of brilliant ideas from speakers that have escaped our notice as a consequence of the quick note we can collect. Hopefully, this will be part of our homework that we must take into account. But, ladies and gentlemen, the wheel must keep turning and the life must remain meaningful. Let us, as human beings, establish a civil society. See you in next year at the same forum. And I would like to mention the beautiful word from Mahatma Gandhi. A nation culture resides in the heart and in the soul of its people. Thank you very much.
It is indeed a beautiful words, Professor. Thank you very much, Professor Dadan Umar Daihani, DEA, Expert Staff of the National Resilience Institute of the Republic of Indonesia. Thank you very much, Professor, for the remarkable summary of the 5th Jakarta Geopolitical Forum 2021. On to the next one, ladies and gentlemen, we will hear the closing remarks of the 5th Jakarta Geopolitical Forum 2021. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome and give your biggest round of applause for the Governor of the Resilient Institute of the Republic of Indonesia, Lieutenant General Agus Wijoyo. General Wijoyo, the time and podium is yours, General. Mohon berkenan.
Distinguished speakers, discussants, moderators, participants, ladies and gentlemen, father, and mother. Kok nggak kalah juga dong. Now we have reached the end of the forum, and it is my heavy task to provide some closing remarks. However, I am feeling privileged and so honored to be entrusted with such an undertaking at a gathering of such amongst eminent people from different parts of the world in the fields of government, expertise, academia, and the media. It has been a great pleasure for me to have you all keep stay with us during these 2 days of the forum. I acknowledge you have demonstrated your remarkable commitment from the beginning till the end, which is for me very meaningful. And I trust your enthusiasm is eloquent to the forum, which I believe will never neglect to get shared views from all speakers, speaking out about culture and civilization, humanity at the crossroads as this year's theme. Allow me, therefore, to extend my high appreciation and sincere gratitude to all speakers, discussants, and moderators for your substantive contribution with very fascinating content in your deliverables that make the forum so vibrant. I don't think all participants evade from learning bright, full of your substantive insights in your deliberations, following dynamic interaction in the form of interactive discussion during the course of the forum. It is very timely also to have your inspired participation in this forum would spark new thoughts for shaping the future of human civilization. For this, I must greatly respect by congratulating you and thanking you all. I will not try to reiterate the findings of the forum because primarily the intent of this forum is not the intent of my remarks is not to arrive, but to initiate a process of enlightenment about the subject matter pertaining to culture and civilization. Is humanity at the crossroads, and into which direction which we will be following? Implied in the intent of the forum is to make us aware of the challenges in hand and to explore further discussions. Furthermore, the role of presenting the summary of this forum has been splendidly provided by Professor Dadan Umar Daihan. Adding more summary in my remarks would worry me to result in redundance or cause further discussion. I may have also some light notes different from Professor Dadan's note, which was very academic, intellectual, and heavy. I may have some light notes, and maybe those that I can pass by is that, first of all, if we think about civilization, we do not have to think about the big things at the macro level, but it is actually of the everyday things that we do. And secondly is that there was the question of technology. Is technology an end, or is technology a tool to reach our destination? And about identity, if we accept identity frankly, there are positive identities and negative identities. We only have to make our choices which to adopt and which not to adopt. In the due course of the meaning that in civilization, humanity and identities, or what sort of identity would we like to have? They are only choices available for us, and we only are open to the consequences. Next is that we cannot undermine of the most special session that we have yesterday. It was very entertaining and educating. It was a clash and a fight, if I would say, between philosophy and science, if I put it right. Or is it between a philosopher and a scientist? But I think we already have the theme for next year's Jakarta Geopolitical Forum. And that is that it is, let's see, this year's forum is culture and civilization. Next year's forum will be the theme of philosophy and science, with a subtitle of Logic at the Crossroads. So I think in the end, this is my part that I have to carry out, and that is to address and with big regret and heavy heart that now it is the time for us to draw this forum to a close. As we are all aware that one purpose of this forum is to facilitate an exchange between experts and academics, but it is also very important to keep in mind that all the results of the forum will be put into recommendations as policy recommendations, and that it is not an end, but it is a start to ignite further discussions to the purpose of our awareness. Once again, thank you to all speakers and moderators. Your presence has been invaluable and without any doubt has helped make the forum a great success. And I would like to express my special gratitude to the effort put out by all the committee that has made this event possible and a great success. I fervently hope all of us will continue to keep being aware of the discourse relating to culture and civilization, and that last but not least, to keep awareness of our health wherever we are in the midst of ongoing pandemic. With this, I declare the forum closed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, General Wijoyo, for the closing remarks and the notes that personally taken by the General himself. Mohon berkenan kepada Bapak Gubernur Lemhanas RI untuk tetap di panggung, untuk berada di samping podium, untuk kemudian nanti memberikan kenang-kenangan kepada perwakilan moderator dan juga pembicara kita. Ladies and gentlemen, father, mother, please give the biggest round of applause for us all and for General Wijoyo for the closing remarks. Thank you very much. Next, ladies and gentlemen, we will begin our proceedings by the Governor of Lemhanas, Republik Indonesia, in order to give token of appreciation for our distinguished speakers and one representation of moderator. I will start by calling Dr. Jong Kuto. Please kindly proceed to the stage. Mohon izin saya arahkan juga, dokter berada di Gubernur silakan di depan podium. Izin. Dokter silakan di titik merah. Ya. Next for Dr. Ryu Hasan, please proceed to the stage, Doctor. Dr. Ryu silakan berada di titik merah di samping Dr. Jong Kuto. Kemudian untuk Profesor Dadan Umar Daihani DA, izin mohon berkenan untuk kembali lagi ke atas panggung, Profesor, untuk menerima token of appreciation. Silakan berada di titik merah yang ketiga, Profesor, terima kasih. Last but not least, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to request Friska Clarissa to the stage as the representation of the moderator. Thank you very much, Friska. Silakan berada di titik di samping Profesor Dadan. Pada Bapak Gubernur diperkenankan memberikan kenang-kenangan kepada pembicara dan perwakilan moderator kita. Silakan Bapak. Oke, terima kasih Bapak Gubernur Lemhanas Republik Indonesia. For our last station, we will have a group photo, ladies and gentlemen, kepada Bapak Gubernur Lemhanas. Berkenan untuk masuk ke tengah-tengah barisan kepada pembicara dan perwakilan moderator untuk menyesuaikan kembali jarak masing-masing. Mungkin geser sedikit, Dokter. Terima kasih banyak. Agar tetap memastikan protokol kesehatan kita tetap dijalankan. Silakan kepada tim. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, as we finally arrived at the end of today's event, I would like to express my gratitude for your kind attention and participation throughout the 5th Jakarta Geopolitical Forum 2021. And we really hope that this event could give a fruitful insight to all of us. We also like to extend our highest appreciation to our distinguished speakers and you, participants, for bringing an amazing session and discussion in this remarkable event. For your kind attention and participation, I thank you. Goodbye and take care. See you at the 6th Jakarta Geopolitical Forum 2022.